Chapter 1320. Bang! After Han Rong dodged the attack of the red silk, he flipped his palm and condensed a sharp ice blade in his palm, attacking Feng Jiu. When Feng Jiu saw this, she immediately used her red silk to block it. The ice blade, which was as thick as a finger and had a sharp tip, landed on her red silk. When it was wrapped by her red silk, a flame surged and instantly melted the ice blade into water droplets that fell to the ground. Demonis. So you're practicing a fire-based technique. Seeing this, Han Rong's eyes flashed and he spoke in a gloomy voice. Just as he finished speaking, the sound of a fart was heard. This loud fart sound was extremely clear and strange. At the same time, it was like oil had been poured on Han Rong's heart, making him go crazy and want to kill Feng Jiu. When Feng Jiu changed from defense to offense, he gathered his hands together and the air in the air was instantly controlled by him. It condensed and enveloped her. The pressure of a fairy realm expert in the air enveloped her, and the air current rose several feet high. It was as if empty Tai was pressing down on her, and it was very aggressive. He wanted to take her life in one blow, so he poured all of his energy into this blow. In an instant, the sky changed color and the wind and clouds surged. In the sky, dark clouds filled the sky, and thunder rumbled. The sand on the ground was swept up. In a few breaths' time, in the dark clouds in the sky, a strong spiritual energy sucked up the sand on the ground and condensed it into a giant sand dragon. Vaguely, the giant sand dragon was like a whirlwind, and the dragon's tail was swaying below. It became bigger and stronger. Hiss. What's that? Heavens! Isn't that the Crown Prince's residence? Why is there a sand dragon stirring in the sky? Look! The sky above the residence has changed color. Is this a fight between two experts? Hiss. Who dares to fight in the Crown Prince's residence with no regard for their lives? They even condensed such a powerful sand dragon. Are they trying to kill someone? The scene in the sky above the Crown Prince's palace shocked everyone in the city. Some families even thought that something big had happened and sent people to investigate. Even in the palace, the monarch furrowed his brows when he heard about this. He ordered people to find out what was going on. And in the study of the manor, Xianyuan Mose had rushed to the main courtyard after hearing the report from the shadow guard. Halfway there, he was also shocked by the powerful and frightening dragon of flying sand in the sky. Damned Han Rong! His face instantly turned ashen. His deep black eyes contained a monstrous fury as he flew towards the main courtyard. There was a trace of fear in his heart. If she was injured in his residence, how could he forgive himself? Han Rong. If he dared to hurt him, he would definitely not let him off. Feng Jiu's hands froze as he looked at the flying sand dragon stirring in the sky with some shock. It turned out that such a strong pressure and air flow was really frightening. It turned out that when a fairy realm expert attacked, if he wanted to kill someone, he would have such a strong explosive force. At this moment, she could even feel the aura of death rushing towards her. Even though her body was protected by the ancient pressure, the blood in her body was also stirred up, and her breathing was slightly chaotic. At this moment, she heard a furious voice coming from somewhere in the residence. Chapter 1321. Feng Jiu was not the only one who heard Xianyuan Mose's words. Everyone in the mansion heard it as well. They were all shocked and looked towards the main yard of the inner yard. Master actually said that if Han Rong dared to hurt her, he would kill Han Rong. It had to be said that these words set off waves of shock in everyone's hearts. Han Rong's position in the mansion had always been very high. However, it was far from the position of the woman beside Master in Master's heart. It was also because of Xianyuan Mose's words that the other fairy realm experts who had been quietly observing in the shadows of the mansion finally flashed out. However, because of the pressure that enveloped Feng Jiu and the airflow that trapped her was too strong, they couldn't go to her side. They could only sternly shout at Han Rong from a few meters away from her. Han Rong! You have no respect for your seniors. Stop it now. Several voices contained a strong pressure that was visible to the naked eye. They attacked Han Rong like thunder, causing blood to flow from the corner of his mouth. However, his eyes were red, and there was madness, unwillingness, and hatred in his eyes. Xianyuan Mo's words that he would kill Han Rong if he dared to hurt Han Rong had angered him. Since Han Rong valued this demonic woman so much, he wanted her dead even more. He did not believe that Han Rong would really kill him after he killed her. Demonic woman. Today, I will definitely kill you. At this moment, Fengjiu did not do anything else. She just stood there quietly, as if she was being suppressed by Han Rong's pressure. However, her expression was normal, and a dark light flashed in her eyes occasionally. It was as if she was waiting for something. When the few fairy realm powerhouses saw that Fengjiu was still able to maintain a calm expression even when facing Han Rong's attack, they were secretly surprised. They couldn't help but think to themselves, could it be that he was scared silly? Otherwise, with her cultivation and strength, how could she not be scared? One had to know that even if Master wanted to protect her, it would be too late. Above her head, the huge sand dragon stirring the sky seemed as if it would rush down in the next moment and destroy and devour her. Fengjiu glanced at the ferocious Han Rong, then looked up at the sand dragon in the sky and muttered, "It's about time." Han Rong. Stop. When they saw Han Rong's hands surging with spiritual energy, they couldn't help but be shocked. With the few of them here, if they still couldn't protect the person their master wanted to protect, then. Thinking of this, the four of them did not hesitate to attack. For powerful air currents suddenly shot out from their palms and collided with Han Rong, who had condensed a protective air current around her. Bang! Boom! Almost at the same time, the huge sand dragon in the sky exploded into scattered sand, and the spiritual energy instantly disappeared in midair. At the same time, the attacks of the four fairies below broke through Han Rong's protective air current with a bang and collided with Han Rong's body, sending her flying dozens of meters away. This sudden change stunned everyone, both in the open and in the dark. This was because they had all seen that the giant sand dragon in the sky had dispersed and disappeared, and it hadn't been destroyed because of the attacks of the four fairy realm experts below it. It was as if something had been cut off, and in an instant, it could not be controlled and shattered. The flying sand could not condense and scattered, and the spiritual energy dissipated because the supply was cut off. Chapter 13:22. Was it her? Her confidence and calmness, was it because she knew that Han Rong would not be able to hurt her in the end? Did she do it? How did she do it? When they attacked Han Rong, they also felt that the spiritual energy in his body seemed to have withered. He had lost all his spiritual energy in an instant. He had used up all his spiritual energy, so naturally, he could not control the sand dragon to deliver a fatal blow. But, how did she do it? How did she make Han Rong lose all his spiritual energy in an instant? They did not see her do it. Pooh. Han Rong spat out a mouthful of blood. He endured the intense pain in his body and stood up. His face had turned pale because of that attack. His entire body swayed as he staggered and was about to fall. He felt that he had lost all his spiritual energy and his spiritual energy had disappeared completely. He could not help but look at the red figure in shock. His heart was in turmoil and he was unable to calm down for a long time. Could it be that she had already done something when there was an abnormality in his body and the spiritual energy was constantly being released? Could it be that she was not just fooling around and teasing him, but had already schemed against him? She had predicted that he would not be able to suppress his anger and come to settle the score with her. She had predicted that he would kill her. She had also predicted that he would lose all his spiritual energy and would not be able to hurt her at all. What a good plan. Step by step, he had stepped into her trap without him knowing. She wanted to get rid of him. After today, would Aze let him stay? Impossible. The pressure and air in the sky dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Below, the air in the air gradually dissipated and the pressure dispersed. Feng Jiu, who had been standing quietly, looked at Han Rong, who was looking at her in shock. The corners of her lips curled up and she revealed an evil and cold smile. Just as her lips curled into a cold smile, a red figure flashed and appeared in front of Han Rong. She grabbed him by the throat and lifted him up against the tree behind him. "You want to kill me?" Han Rong's eyes narrowed. His throat was choked and he was powerless as he was lifted up against the tree. Just a moment ago, he wanted to kill her and thought that he would definitely be able to kill her. Who knew that in the next moment, the situation would turn around? A mere servant dares to be half a master in this manner. "I thought you were a smart person, but it seems that I have overestimated you." Her cold voice rang out, and the hand around his neck tightened. Looking at his narrowed eyes, she laughed coldly and threw him to the side, right in front of Xianyuan Mose, who had been standing there for a while. "I won't deal with this person. He's your man, so you can deal with him." When it came to people who wanted her life, she would never leave them alive. If this person wasn't one of Xianyuan Mose's men, she would have snapped his neck with one hand. Xianyuan Mose stood there, followed by Hui Lang and Ning Yi. Hui Lang, who had witnessed the previous scene with his own eyes, felt his heart was still beating wildly at this time. He only felt that it was extremely incredible. At this time, when he saw the ghost doctor throw the heavily injured Han Rong in front of his master for him to deal with, his heart froze and he couldn't help but look at his master. Han Rong had not only watched his master grow up, he had also saved his master and his son's life. Otherwise, his position in this manner would not be so special. Chapter 13:23. In an instant, almost everyone's eyes fell on Xianyuan Mose and Han Rong, both in the dark and in the open. They couldn't guess how their master would deal with Han Rong. After all, he was worthy of being addressed as Uncle Han by their master, which was enough to prove that he was different from them. Even so, after he tried to kill Feng Jiu, would their master still tolerate him? The atmosphere seemed to have condensed at this moment. Everyone held their breaths as they watched. After Han Rong stood up with his heavily injured body, he looked at Xianyuan Mose. His lips moved slightly as he opened his mouth. "Ah." Hiss. "Ah." Just as he opened his mouth to say the first word, before he could even say the word "zay," he let out a shrill scream. That scream pierced through the sky and rushed into the clouds, crashing into everyone's eardrums. It was accompanied by the splattering of blood in front of everyone's eyes, deeply shocking everyone's vision and heart. They only saw their master raise his hand and a sharp blade of air flew out, chopping off Han Rong's right arm. The moment the arm flew out, the blood splattered all over the ground. It was a ghastly sight, everyone's hearts tightened. At this moment, they all lowered their heads, not daring to look at their master's expression. They only stared at the blood splattered on the ground and the severed arm, as well as the screaming Han Rong who was holding his severed arm and enduring the intense pain. They saw the disbelief on his face, the unwillingness on his face, and a crazy hatred growing in his eyes. Xianyuan Mose retracted his hand and stood with his hands behind his back. His deep and serene eyes were as deep as a lake, chilling to the bone. He looked condescendingly at Han Rong who had fallen to the ground. A cold and emotionless voice accompanied by a bloodthirsty murderous intent came out of his mouth. "I have said before, you are not allowed to touch my woman. Looks like you didn't take it to heart. A slave bullying his master, do you think I won't kill you? Even though you have watched me grow up, you still don't understand my character." His cold gaze carried a bone-chilling coldness as he stared at the person who was sitting in a daze. He watched as the blood that reached his shoulder seeped out from between his palms and dripped to the ground, blooming into snowflakes. "I respectfully call you Uncle Han because you've been by my mother's side for so many years. You've also saved the lives of my mother and me when we were young. However, it's not for you to control me as an elder, and it's not for you to have the right to kill my woman. As soon as he finished speaking, he flipped his palm, and a force came out from his palm, directly sucking the person on the ground over. A powerful spiritual aura condensed in his palm, and he slapped the person's dantian across the air, shattering the person's dantian. Under everyone's shocked gazes, he destroyed the person's cultivation. Then, he raised his hand and threw the person back to the ground. You touched my reverse scale. This is the price you have to pay. Xianyuan Mose flung his sleeves and stood with his hands behind his back. His cold voice contained a frightening pressure as he said, "Ing Yi Hui Lang, expel him from the imperial city. He is never allowed to take a step into the imperial city again." Yes. The two people responded in a deep voice and took a step forward to take the person out. At this time, Han Rong, with one arm broken and his cultivation crippled, was seriously injured. At this time, he no longer had the strength to speak. He could only stare at Feng Jiu with a pair of malicious eyes, as if he wanted to remember her face in his mind. Chapter 1324. From being in charge of the Black Dungeon to having his cultivation crippled and banished from the Imperial City, it was as if he had fallen from the sky to the ground. An ordinary person would have bitten off their tongue and committed suicide after such an incident. After all, to a fairy realm expert, having his dantian shattered and his cultivation crippled was worse than being killed. How could he get used to the life of an ordinary person if he was used to the life of an expert? Moreover, they looked at the figure being taken away. With every step that Ing Yi and Hui Lang took, Han Rong's body and face changed visibly. He quickly aged and became an old man with white hair and a face full of wrinkles. For a cultivator, once his cultivation was destroyed and his strength was crippled, he could only become an ordinary person. His lifespan, which was originally increased by his cultivation, would also be reduced because of his cultivation. Han Rong, who was banished like this, would definitely die soon. Xianyuan Mose slowly walked up to Feng Jiu and asked, "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." She looked at him and asked, "He saved your life and your mother's?" "So that's how it was." Hui Lang only told her that he had watched Mose grow up. He did not mention that he had saved their lives. However, even if he knew, today's scene was inevitable. She only needed to ask a little to know his eating habits. Even if he wanted to, he would not be able to guard against her. If he did not want to kill her, today's result would only be him making a fool of himself. However, the moment he wanted to kill her, the result would be different. The surrounding people silently retreated, leaving only the two of them in the same place. Even so, it can't be used as a life-saving talisman to kill you. He reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Feeling the reality of her in his arms, his heart finally calmed down. God knows how anxious and furious he was when he saw that scene. He was afraid that something would happen to her, and even more afraid that the person who hurt her was someone close to him. If that was the case, he would not be able to forgive himself. Fortunately, she was fine and standing in front of him. "Sorry, I made you worry." Feng Jiu wrapped his arms around his waist and pressed his face against his chest, apologizing softly. Although she was prepared, he didn't know. When she heard his anxious and worried voice coming from the manor, she didn't feel good. He rested his chin on the top of her head and gently stroked her soft hair with one hand. He said slowly, "It's good that you're okay." In the imperial palace when the monarch heard the news from the secret guard, he was furious and slammed his hand on the armrest. This Han Rong actually wants to kill Feng Jiu. How audacious. Who did he think he was? Even a servant dares to be so lawless. How presumptuous. The shadow guard lowered his head and reported, "The crown prince has already chopped off one of his arms, crippled his cultivation, and expelled him from the imperial city." Humph. If he didn't do that, I wouldn't mind helping him. I've long disliked that Han Rong. The monarch gave a cold snort. He was quite satisfied with Xianyuan Mose's actions. However, because of this, it has alarmed the various powers in the imperial city. Other than the monarch sending this subordinate to investigate, the various powers in the imperial city have also sent people to investigate. This subordinate estimates that in a day or two, the news of the crown prince having a woman by his side will spread. Chapter 1325. After a long while, he waved his hand, "Forget it, let's not bother about him. He can handle his own matters." As he spoke, he stood up, flung his sleeves, and walked out. As the news of the crown prince cutting off one of Han Rong's arms and banishing her spread, the various powers in the imperial city were curious as to who that woman was. Thus, they secretly asked around. However, the people in the crown prince's residence were tight-lipped, and they could not get any information out of them. They did not even know what that woman looked like. They could only ask around on the streets, and they found out that the woman was dressed in red, and her face was covered by a veil. Crown Prince Xianyuan Mose did not have a single woman by his side all year round. Now that such a woman had suddenly appeared, and he had even crippled an important person by his side for her, it was obvious that this woman had a special place in his heart. However, no matter how curious they were, they could not find out any other information about that woman. A few days later, in the residence, Fengjiu was resting on a soft couch in the courtyard with his eyes closed, while Xianyuan Mose was taking care of business at the stone table beside him. Dong had been sent away, and the remaining 3 people, after witnessing the scene from a few days ago, had lost all interest in Xianyuan Mose. They even avoided him, afraid that if they got too close, Fengjiu would be angered and punish them. On the evening of the day that Han Rong was banished, the 3 of them knelt in front of Fengjiu and told him everything that Han Rong had asked them to do. They did not dare to hide anything. Fengjiu already knew about this, but seeing that the 3 of them were more obedient, he did not pay much attention to them. He only allowed them to stay by her side to assist her, and when she was about to leave, he would arrange for them to be in the outer courtyard. She lay on the soft couch with her eyes closed, and waved her hand to dismiss the few people who were massaging her legs. She looked at the sky, and then looked at Xianyuan Mose, who was taking care of business. She paused for a moment, and said, "Mose, I plan to leave." As soon as she said this, the busy Xianyuan Mose paused and looked at her. "You're leaving? So soon? Didn't you say you have a few months?" Fengjiu rolled his eyes. "I've been living here for more than 2 months. Including the journey back and forth, isn't that a few months? Can't you stay for a few more days?" he asked with a slight frown. He looked at her and said, "Actually, you can let me handle your matters." This way, she wouldn't have to leave and could stay by his side. However, he knew that she didn't want to rely on him. He knew that she wanted to become stronger. Thus, even if he was reluctant, he could only let her handle it herself and train herself. "Stay for 2 more days. I'll stay for 2 more days before leaving." She sat up and said, "I'm already here, what's there to be reluctant about? What's more, as long as I have the chance, I'll come back to see you. You can tell me where you want to go. That way, I can go and see you." Unexpectedly, she smiled slyly. "I'm not telling you." Hearing this, he sighed helplessly. "All right. Even if you don't tell me, I'll find out in the future. Since you're leaving, I won't do anything else these 2 days. I'll accompany you. You should go and take care of your business. Don't delay it." Chapter 1326. "Do you really want to accompany me?" She blinked, and her eyes flashed with an inexplicable light, as if she was thinking of something evil. "Yes," he replied and waited for her to continue. She immediately jumped up and said, "Then let's change our clothes and go out. You can put on a beard while you're at it." Hearing this, he glanced at her with a strange expression and said, "Didn't you think that I'm too old?" She kept calling him uncle, and now she wanted him to change into Ling Mohan. She held back her laughter and said, "Why would I? Even if you're old, you're still a very handsome and cool uncle. Don't worry, I won't dislike you no matter what." It's just that if you go out with me like this, you'll be too eye-catching, especially when those women are staring at you. So, it's better that we change our appearance when we go out to play. Thus, she pushed him into the room and called Hui Lang to help him change into his clothes and put on his beard. She quickly went into the room and found a green robe to put on, and then slightly trimmed it before walking out of the room. When she came out, she saw Xianyuan Mose, who was wearing a gray robe and had a big beard on his face, sitting there drinking tea. She immediately walked up to him with a smile and looked at him from head to toe. "Uncle, you look so friendly." "Sigh, I haven't seen you with a big beard in a long time." Hearing this, Xianyuan Mose's mouth twitched. He glanced at her and saw that she was wearing a green robe, which was inconspicuous and not ostentatious. Even her face had been groomed. He nodded and said, "You look good, let's go." He stood up and naturally held her hand as they walked out the door. Seeing the two of them go out, Hui Lang and Ying Yi watched from behind. After a while, Hui Lang elbowed Ying Yi beside him and said, "Do you think we should follow them?" "Yes," Ying Yi said and had already moved forward. Seeing this, Hui Lang grinned and also moved forward, following behind them secretly. When the two of them followed in the dark, they saw the bearded man holding the hand of a white-robed youth walking on the street. Ying Yi's eyes flashed and a smile appeared in his eyes. On the other hand, Hui Lang was even more direct. He grinned and looked at the two people who acted as if there was no one else around them. "Master is so domineering. You see, the entire street seems to only be occupied by the two of them. Two grown men holding hands on the street. This scene is so strange no matter how you look at it. As long as Master thinks it's good, it's fine. Don't talk too much," Ying Yi said in a low voice. Hui Lang couldn't help but grin when he saw the crowd sizing up the two of them from time to time. He didn't say anything else and just quietly followed them in the dark. Xianyuan Mose completely ignored the gazes around him. He held her hand and looked around. When he saw a small stall selling sugar-fried chestnuts on the street ahead, he walked over with Fengjiu. "Give me a pack." As soon as he finished speaking, the money was already placed on the stall. "Okay." The peddler's tone was brisk. He quickly packed a pack of sugar-fried chestnuts and handed it over. "Guest, your sugar-fried chestnuts are delicious. Come again next time." As he spoke, he curiously looked at the two holding hands. These two grown men were actually holding hands on the street. That was way too bold of him. Chapter 13:27. "Here, open your mouth." She brought the peeled chestnuts to his mouth. At that moment, the people on the street who were curious about the two of them could not help but widen their eyes when they saw them. Xianyuan Mose glanced at the people on the street who were looking at them curiously with wide eyes. He looked a little embarrassed and a little uncomfortable, but his heart was faintly jumping with joy and joy. He was uncomfortable and embarrassed because he had never acted like this in front of others, but he was happy because Fengjiu was not afraid of the people's gazes and intimately fed him food. This kind of feeling was just like a public display of affection. Thinking of this, he proudly glanced at the people around him. Under those people's gazes, he opened his mouth and ate the chestnut she brought to his mouth. His ears were slightly red, but his face was still cold. He nodded and said, "It tastes good." It was more than just good. It was so sweet that it entered his heart and made him feel like he was floating. Fengjiu did not know what he was thinking. In addition, half of his face was covered by the big beard, so she could not see his expression clearly. She only knew that he habitually kept a straight face and looked like he did not want anyone to get close to him. She smiled and said, "You like it? Then I'll peel it for you." "Okay." Her short reply couldn't hide the joy in her eyes and the joy in her heart. The two of them walked and strolled. When Fengjiu came across something interesting, she would stop to take a look and touch it, while Xianyuan Mose would ask from the side, "You like it? I'll buy it." After walking down a few streets, Fengjiu could not help but facepalm. Don't buy any more. I just looked at it a little longer. If I buy everything that I looked at a little longer, it would be a waste. Besides, there are some things that I don't need. It's okay. I have money. Hearing his domineering words, Fengjiu could not help but laugh. She looked at him and said, "Yes, yes, I know you have money. You're amazing. This man, how could he be so cute? Pfft, 2 country bumpkins." Suddenly, a disdainful voice rang out, attracting their attention. The two of them looked at each other, then looked at the person who spoke. They saw a few well-dressed young masters with 2 women standing not far away. One of them was holding a fan in his hand and was leisurely fanning himself. His eyes were looking at them with disdain and contempt. They're not just 2 country bumpkins. I think they're gay. How can it be normal for 2 grown men to act so intimately on the street? Xianyuan Mose glanced at them and frowned. His eyes were filled with displeasure. Fengjiu chuckled and held his hand. Don't worry about them. Let's go. They were just irrelevant people. Why should he get angry over them? Moreover, what did they know? One had to know that sometimes, what one saw with their eyes might not be true. Of course, they wanted to leave and didn't bicker with them, but those people thought that they were easy to bully because they backed down. Unexpectedly, they raised their voice and said, "Hey, didn't you say you have money? Do you dare to go somewhere with us to play?" Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu continued to walk forward, pretending not to hear. What? You don't dare. A few men stepped forward and blocked their way. They stared at their clothes and said, "You dare to say you have money in front of this young master? How arrogant." Chapter 13:28. Yi glanced at him. It's that bastard brother of his, using his concubine mother's favor to stir up trouble all day long. This time he's provoked Master and the ghost doctor. His ability isn't small either. When I go back and tell Yang Yong about it, I reckon his face will darken. Alright, stop talking. Look in front. Yi gestured for him to keep quiet. Fengjiu, who was originally preparing to leave, stopped in his tracks and sized up the person, asking, "Are you very rich?" That person raised his chin like a proud peacock, "Of course. Brat, you're not from here, right? You don't recognize this young master." "That's right, this is young Master Yang, an aristocratic family from the imperial city. His elder brother, Yang Yong, is a favorite of the crown prince." The 2 men standing next to him laughed as they announced Yang Yong's identity. When they heard this, Xianyuan Mo's and Fengjiu's expressions changed, a strange look flashed across their eyes. Yang Yong's younger brother? This guy? The 2 of them carefully sized him up again, seeing that this person was only at the peak of the foundation establishment stage, not even a golden core stage cultivator. He was dressed like a noble young master, but this kind of temperament, this kind of posture, made people not dare to be respectful. "Where did you say we were going?" Fengjiu asked with a smile, his eyes flashing with a cunning light. When they heard this, they looked at each other, revealing a cold smile. That bastard brother of Yang Yong glanced at the 2 of them, then turned to leave. "Follow me if you have the guts." He turned to leave, the people behind him also followed. It was very obvious that he was the leader of the group. "Let's go and have some fun," Fengjiu said with a smile, pulling Xianyuan Mose to follow them. "It can't be. The place you were talking about is the casino." Fengjiu looked at the noisy place in front of her. The sounds of people placing their bets and opening their hands messily entered her ears. She had been in the imperial city for so long, but this was the first time she had been to a casino in the imperial city. Looking at the scale, it was actually quite big. What? Scared? This is the most luxurious casino in the imperial city. You'll need at least 10,000 gold coins to enter this place. Today, you're only able to enter because of me. Yang Yong's younger brother had a smug look on his face as he took out an identity jade card and led them inside. As for the two women who had been following him, they stopped outside the casino and left. After all, they were women. If news of them entering such a place spread, it would be bad for their reputation. Therefore, they did not follow them in. Fengjiu looked at the small mountain of gold coins on the table, and his eyes lit up. Scared, I'm really scared. I didn't expect there to be such a place in the imperial city. If Ning Lang, who loved money as much as his life, came here, he probably wouldn't be able to take a step forward. Xianyuan Mose, who was next to her, saw her eyes shining as she stared at the gold coins and treasures on the table. He couldn't help but shake his head. Her interests and hobbies seemed to be different from ordinary girls. He, so it's third young Master Yang who has come. A steward came out to greet them. In the midst of the lively scene, he cupped his hands and bowed to the man surnamed Yang. He looked at the two men beside him, as well as Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose, and asked, Third young Master Yang, did you bring your friends here to play? What do you want to play today? Chapter 1329. Brat, what are you playing over there? This young master called you here so that you can bet with me. He shouted in annoyance. I'm going to win some money first. Fengjiu replied without turning her head. She stared at the two colored cups on the table and heard the people around her shouting for big and small. She grinned and shouted, big. Xianyuan Mose watched her play and did not stop her. Seeing her win a lot after a few rounds, many people around them exclaimed that this youth was lucky. But, luck? As for her, he had never thought that she relied on luck. Pfft! Didn't you say you were rich? So you don't even have money. Yang San sneered and opened his fan. He glanced at the young man who was gambling enthusiastically, then looked at the bearded man and asked, Hey, aren't you going down to play a few rounds? Xianyuan Mose did not even pay attention to him. His attention was only on Fengjiu. All in. Fengjiu shouted and pushed the small mountain of gold coins in front of him to the side of the big cup. You're betting big again. You've already won 5 rounds of big, there's no way you're betting big again. That's right, that's right. Little brother, you're betting so much money on big. Aren't you afraid that you'll lose everything in small? What's there to worry about? Of those who could come here to play, which one of them didn't have money? Maybe they won't even care about this little bit. That's true. Ha, then I won't bet. I won't bet on big with him. I'll bet on small too. Small. I'll definitely bet on small this round. Good. I'm done betting. At the same time, the cover of the cup was removed, revealing the numbers inside, 4, 5, 6, big. Ha, I won again. Fengjiu said happily. He withdrew his hand and put the gold coins in front of him. He took out his Qiankuan pouch and began to put them in. The people around them could not help but feel jealous. Little brother, are you betting big or small this time? I'll bet with you this round. That's right, I'll follow you too. Little brother, do you want to buy big or small? All of them were asking questions, thinking that they would definitely win if they followed this young man. Unexpectedly, the young man smiled and waved his hand. I'm not playing anymore. I'm going to play with the one over there. You guys continue. With that, he left the table. Look, we've won so much. She handed the Qiankuan pouch to Xianyuan Mose with a face full of joy. I didn't expect you to have some skills. Yang San glanced at Fengjiu and said, Let's go. Let's go up there and play big. You have money? Fengjiu raised his eyebrows and glanced at him. If you don't have real money, I won't play with you. Tisk. Do you think I don't have money? Don't you know that our Yang family is the wealthiest among the aristocratic families in the imperial city? As he spoke, he turned to the steward beside him and said, Lead the way, get a table on the second floor. Alright, third young Master Yang, please come upstairs. Everyone, please come upstairs. The steward gestured for them to go up, and at the same time, glanced at Fengjiu. They had gambled a few times and won all of them. This was definitely not a fluke. However, this third young Master Yang had been in the casino for a long time and had some skills. It would be difficult for this young man to beat him. Chapter 1330. Stepping into the second floor, it was obviously different from the first floor. The upper floors were separated by rooms, but they were not enclosed rooms. Instead, there was a screen separating each long table. There were also chairs placed beside the tables. The tables on the first floor did not have chairs. Everyone was crowding around the tables gambling. It was obvious that the difference on the second floor was slightly better. She glanced around. Because of the screen, she could only vaguely see people sitting at each long table, but she could not see the bets on the table. They were led by the manager to another long table. The few of them sat down and the servants served tea and snacks. At the same time, a woman in tight clothes was sent over to ask them how they would like to play. How do you want to play? Tell me. I'll go easy on you. As Yang San spoke, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Fengjiu and Xianyuan Mose with disdain. Since you have so much money, of course we'll gamble. Fengjiu said matter-of-factly. He picked up the gambling cup on the table and shook it. He asked, just the two of us. Do they want to play? He looked at the other two men. Yes, we have to play with you no matter what, right? The two of them said in unison. They naturally dared to gamble. After all, as the children of aristocratic families, they still had some money on them. Moreover, with Yang San around, they naturally felt more at ease. After all, Yang San had learned gambling skills before. Alright, let's play the most direct game, big or small. No problem. The few of them began to play. Xianyuan Mose watched from the side and did not say anything. Among the two of them, he did not play. Only Fengjiu played with them. When Fengjiu won one round after another, Yang San was still able to hold his ground. As for the other two, their foreheads were already sweating. Should we bet on big or small? The two of them looked at Yang San and asked. Small. Yang San frowned and said. After betting gold coins, the two of them could only take out their valuables and bet. When the results came out big again, their faces instantly turned pale. There's nothing left. We've all lost. This is going to be troublesome. How am I going to explain this when I get back? The two of them sat there absent-mindedly, watching as even the valuables on their waists were taken away by the young man. Looking at his satisfied and happy face, they were so angry that they clenched their teeth, but there was nothing they could do. In the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, they had already lost to the point that they had even taken off their clothes. Their upper bodies were naked, only wearing a pair of pants that reached their thighs. They were ashamed and angry. If they had known that this kid's gambling skills were so good, they wouldn't have gambled with him even if they were beaten to death. However, even if they regretted it now, they couldn't get back what they had lost. Get out, Xianyuan Mose glanced at them, feeling that the two men's bare upper bodies were an eyesore. The two of them only felt a powerful and intimidating pressure coming at them, causing their faces to turn pale. They didn't even dare to speak or resist. They just stood up and walked out just like that. They went down the first floor and quickly left. Fengjiu, who was sitting at the side, held his chin with one hand and tilted his head slightly to look at Xianyuan Mose. He smiled and asked, "Do you want to play a few rounds as well?" "No need, you can play," he said and took a sip of tea. Chapter 1331. Although Yang San was muddle-headed, his eyesight was not bad. After playing so many games, he knew that the youth in front of him did not win because of luck, but because he really had some skills. In addition, when the big man spoke, the two people did not dare to say a word and ran away. Although the pressure in that moment did not hit him, he could still clearly feel the terror of the other party. At this time, his heart was in a mess, and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He lifted his sleeve to wipe the sweat, picked up the tea and drank a few mouthfuls, and said, "I'll go and relieve myself. I'll come back and talk." As he spoke, he stood up and hurried out. "Do you think he'll escape by going to the toilet?" Fengjiu asked with a smile as he held his chin and looked at Xianyuan Mose. Xianyuan Mose took a sip of tea and said calmly, "He won't be able to escape." Yes, he won't be able to escape. Yang San was sure that he wanted to escape by going to the toilet. He felt that if he continued to gamble, he would end up like the two people. After playing for so long, he could more or less figure out the two people's strength. They were definitely not people he could provoke. It was better to run away. But who knew that just as he was about to leave by climbing over the wall, a voice came from behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" His body stiffened, and he lay there in a daze for a moment. Then he realized that it was not the two people's voices, but when he turned around, he was so scared that his face turned white. "Big brother Hui Lang, big brother Ing Yi." His body trembled, and he quickly climbed down from above. Why are you here?" "My second brother didn't come, right?" "Pfft." Hui Lang snorted and looked at him. "Don't call me big brother, big brother. We're not that close. Quickly go back after you're done." "Oh, yes, I'll go back right away, right away." He hurriedly replied. Just as he was about to turn around and climb over the wall, a hand landed on his shoulder. "I told you to go back inside and continue gambling. Where do you think you're going?" Hui Lang asked with a sinister smile. Hearing this, his face turned white. Go back inside and continue gambling." "That's right. Didn't you provoke them? You want to escape now? Don't even think about it. Hurry up and go back." He gave him a shove, then stood there with his arms crossed and stared at him. Yang San swallowed his saliva and asked cautiously, "Big brother Hui and Hui Lang know them?" "What gray Hui Lang? You brat, are you asking for a beating? So much nonsense. If you don't go in, I'll kick you in." Hui Lang snorted coldly. "Now you're scared. What were you doing just now?" Seeing this, he could only brace himself and walk back while thinking, who are those two people? Hui Lang and Ing Yi were the crown prince's personal bodyguards. Why were they here? Could it be, thinking of that possibility, and then thinking of that big man's shout, and the powerful pressure, for a moment, his legs went soft, and he almost knelt down. When he returned, he saw that the two of them were still sitting there. One of them was drinking tea while the other was resting his chin on his hand. They looked bored from waiting. With a pale face, he hurriedly stepped forward and said, "The two of you, why don't I invite the two of you to a restaurant to eat?" "No need, have a seat. Let's continue." Fengjiu smiled and gestured with his eyes. Seeing this, he could only sit down stiffly, his body trembling. After thinking for a moment, he took out all the money and treasures he had on him, piling them on the table and pushing them in front of Fengjiu. Chapter 1332. "Look at me, my body isn't feeling well. Can you let me go back first?" He looked at Fengjiu anxiously, feeling a bit uneasy. Fengjiu looked at the pile of treasures on the table and felt a bit dazzled. She looked at him again and saw that he really didn't have the courage. With so many treasures as an apology, she smiled and nodded, "All right then. Since you know you're wrong, I'll be magnanimous and not bicker with you. I'll accept these things. You can go." Yes, thank you young master. Thank you young master." He was overjoyed when he heard this and quickly stood up. He cupped his hands in thanks and left in a hurry. Only the two of them were left sitting at the table. Xianyuan Mose saw her greedy look as she held the treasures and smiled. He couldn't help but find it funny. You like these things that much? She looked as if she wanted to kiss them a few times. He didn't see her with such an infatuated and excited gaze. Who wouldn't like such dazzling and beautiful things? As she spoke, she took out a qiankuan pouch and put it away. She said, I made a lot of money today. If I knew there was such a good place in the imperial city, I wouldn't have stayed in the manor all day. There are even more treasures in the manor's treasury. Why aren't you interested in taking a look? They're all in the manor. What's there to see? These are different. Look, other people's things become ours. This kind of feeling makes people excited. She put away the qiankuan pouch and said, let's go outside and play a few more rounds. All right. Whatever you like. He knew her gambling skills were good, so he let her be. The two of them went next door to play. Most of the time, it was Fengjiu playing while Xianyuan Mose watched from the side. In less than an hour, they changed tables several times. Finally, they won a lot and prepared to leave with satisfaction. The people in the casino had their eyes on Fengjiu since she never lost a bet. Thus, the people above asked, who are those two people? They seem to be outsiders. It's the first time they came to our casino. They were brought by Yang San Gongzi. However, Yang San Gongzi and the others lost everything and left. Oh. You're quite capable. As the middle-aged man spoke, his gaze swept past the boy and landed on the burly man. He frowned slightly. Do you want me to go down? A tall and thin man with bright eyes asked. No need. The middle-aged man shook his head. I can't see through these two people, but they give me a very dangerous feeling. It's better not to act rashly to avoid unnecessary trouble for the casino. The tall and thin man was slightly surprised. He glanced at the two and nodded. Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, he saw that the two people had already walked out. A few people in the casino looked at each other and followed after them. They've left, but there are still a few tails following behind them. The tall and skinny man said. Get someone to follow them from afar. Don't do anything, the middle-aged man ordered. Yes. The tall and thin man replied and left with the other three, secretly following behind those people. After leaving the casino, Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu felt a few tails following behind them. However, they didn't care. They didn't care about those people. Even if they wanted to attack, they didn't need to. Let's go watch the sunset. Fengjiu looked at him and said. Okay. Chapter 1333. Therefore, the two of them went out of the city together. When they were out of the city, the gamblers behind them also dashed out. When they were about to follow them, they were stopped by Ying Yi and Hui Lang. Where do you want to go? Hui Lang took out his long sword and stared at the gamblers who were full of killing intent. These people should be casual cultivators who mingled in the casino. They thought they had targeted a fat sheep. Humph. Two people come to die. I'll fulfill your wish. One of them stared at Hui Lang with gloomy eyes like a poisonous snake. The next moment, he took out his long sword and went straight to Hui Lang. Stop us from getting rich, you're courting death. The other gamblers also shouted. Their spiritual power surged, and Meng and Zhao Ying-yi surrounded them. In their view, there were 5 of them, and the other side only had 2 people. If they dared to block their way, they were definitely courting death. Ying-yi's face was cold. He flicked the sword at his waist, and at the same time, a black figure flashed out. His long sword carried a fierce murderous aura, and he took the life of the person who rushed to the front. Ah! The sword shadow flashed, and a trace of scarlet blood instantly oozed out from the neck of a gambler. The man's eyes widened in disbelief, and he stared in front of him. His body stiffened, and he fell down with a muffled groan. Hiss! What a fast sword! The other gamblers gasped. They saw the sword shadow flash out, and they didn't see how he took the life of a gambler. They couldn't help but be shocked, but they didn't retreat. Instead, they gritted their teeth and rushed forward. Kill him! Ing Yi's figure flashed past the dead gambler and attacked the second gambler. When the two swords collided, there was a sonorous sound, and a trace of sparks burst out. The fierce sword chi surged around, and the murderous intent was terrifying. On the other side, Hui Lang saw that Ing Yi was slow, but he killed a gambler first. When he heard those people exclaiming that Ing Yi's sword was so fast, he was immediately dissatisfied. He shouted, "My sword is not slow, I'll let you taste my power." Swish! Sword chi flowed out like a stream. His unexpected attack was not aimed at the person in front of him, but at the person beside him. Although that person was prepared, he did not expect Hui Lang's sword to attack him instead of the opponent in front of him. By the time he reacted, it was already too late to block. He only felt a sharp pain radiating from his body, and the spiritual power he had condensed all over his body dissipated in an instant. Looking down, there was a bloody hole in his dantian, and the golden core in his body had been shattered. Bang! He couldn't even scream. It was as if his breath was stuck in his throat. His body stiffened and fell forward. His body twitched a few times before he stopped breathing. Bang! The moment the sword chi killed that person, Hui Lang's palm struck out towards the opponent in front of him. A palm strike that contained a strong airflow struck out and instantly sent him flying several meters away, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Pooh! The man stared in horror at Hui Lang, whose entire body was emanating a murderous aura. He spat out a mouthful of blood that splashed all over his body. Suppressing the serious injuries in his body, he turned around and fled. "You want to leave? Wait for your grandpa wolf to agree." Hui Lang snorted. He aimed the long sword in his hand at the man's back and patted the hilt of the sword with his other hand. The long sword pierced through the man's body with a whoosh. Ah! Chapter 1334. They didn't dare to join in the fun to see what was going on. Only cultivators who were confident in their own strength would dare to be curious about such things. It was best for them to hurry into the city and avoid trouble. And in the shadows, the tall and thin man from the casino who was watching this scene had a slight change in expression. Perhaps others might not recognize those two, but to him, a native of the imperial city, it was impossible for him not to recognize those two. Beside Crown Prince Shenyuan, other than the second young master of the Yang family who was the steward of the residence, there were also two guards who followed him closely. Those were the shadow guard Ing Yi, and the other was the guard called Hui Lang. It was reported that Ing Yi was the head of the shadow guards, and Hui Lang was the captain of the guards. Both of them were extremely skilled, and were loyal and devoted. They were deeply trusted by Crown Prince Shenyuan Mose. It could be said that wherever he went, he would bring these two with him. And now, these two people had appeared here to stop those gamblers. This made him uncontrollably shocked, and he tried to guess who the bearded man and the youth from before were. He carefully glanced in front of him, and saw the corpses of those gamblers lying on the ground. The thick smell of blood permeated the air, and the murderous aura was even more frightening. At that moment, he gestured, and the few of them quietly retreated, quickly returning. They couldn't follow them anymore. If they did, he was sure that they would end up like those people. 5 people, I killed 3. Hui Lang said proudly, his tone boasting. Ing Yi glanced at him, and couldn't be bothered to argue with him. He only said, "Those people left." As he said that, he glanced at the place where those people were originally hiding. They were from the casino. They probably just wanted to investigate the identities of Master and the Ghost Doctor. If they left, then they left. There's no need to bother with them. Hui Lang said casually, wiping the sword in his hand and putting it away. Take care of the corpses on the ground. Ying Yi said. Ah. We still have to deal with them. Grey Wolf glared. If we kill them, do we still have to find a hole to bury them? Hearing this, Ying Yi looked at him with a strange expression before taking out a bottle of something and pouring it on those people. Sizzling sounds could be heard, and soon, all of the corpses on the ground were corroded, leaving only their clothes and blood on the ground. Didn't you say that the corpse-dissolving water is gone? Where did you get it? Give me some. Hui Lang stretched out his hand and begged. I had the ghost doctor concoct it. As he spoke, he handed over 2 bottles to him. Use it sparingly. Hui Lang's eyes lit up when he heard that it was Fengjiu's. Just as he was about to ask her to give him some when he went back, he remembered that she was leaving in 2 days. He couldn't help but sigh. She's leaving in 2 days. I don't know when I'll see her again. Hearing this, Ying Yi said, Master should be the one worrying. What are you worrying about? Hui Lang muttered, do you think I'm like you? After being together for so long, I also have feelings for the ghost doctor. I won't be willing to let her leave. I'll tell Master about this. After taking care of the corpses, he turned and walked back. Chapter 1335. Seeing him walk away without looking back, he quickly chased after him and shouted, Hey, Ying Yi, I'm talking to you. Did you hear me? At the same time, in the casino, the tall and skinny man told the middle-aged man what he had seen. The middle-aged man couldn't help but be secretly shocked. Fortunately, I didn't let you guys mess around. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Thinking of that possibility, he couldn't help but be secretly afraid. As the manager of the casino, any decision could affect the survival of the casino. Because of this, he was used to thinking twice before doing anything and looking at the bigger picture. It was also because of this that the casino's position in the imperial city was solidifying day by day. Today, if he had let his subordinates deal with those 2 people for the sake of that small profit, the consequences could be imagined. Master, could this bearded man be? The tall and skinny man guessed, looking at him and asking. It should be him. Otherwise, Ying Yi and Hui Lang wouldn't have appeared there. The middle-aged man said, lightly exhaling. Hearing this, the tall and skinny man was secretly shocked, feeling that he had walked on the edge of life and death. That was close. Compared to the bustling city, Chaoyang Mountain was exceptionally tranquil and beautiful. 2 figures sat side by side at the top of the mountain, watching the sunset slowly slide down from the horizon, dyeing the sky red with a charming rosy glow. As the sun went down the mountain, the sky gradually darkened. The 2 sat on the mountain top, enjoying the wind. Fengjiu leaned in Xianyuan Mo's arms, while Xianyuan Mo's hugged her, shielding her from the chill of the night. It's cooler on the mountain at night, let's go back. He whispered in her ear, greedily enjoying the leisurely time together. Then you carry me back. She acted shamelessly, slightly raising her head to look at him with a smile. Okay. He leaned down, kissing those tempting lips. After a light kiss, he still wanted more. Let's go back and continue. He looked at her and said. Hearing this, Fengjiu laughed, looking at him angrily, don't even think about it. Hearing this, he sighed and stood up. With a bitter tone, he said, all right then. I'll just think about it in my dreams at night. As he spoke, he took out a cloak and draped it over her body. Then, he turned around and bent down, indicating, come on, I'll carry you back. If you're tired, you can lie on my back and sleep. Seeing this, her eyes lit up, and she jumped onto his back. After lying on top of him, she wrapped her arms around his neck and clamped her legs around his waist. Okay, let's go. His broad shoulders were stiff and taut, but it gave people a sense of security and reliability. She laid on his back and felt the warmth of his body passing into her body. In this night, it was exceptionally comfortable and warm. Hold me tight. He put his hands behind his back and held her legs, walking down the mountain. His steps were not fast or slow, and he was not in a hurry to fly back. Instead, he carried Fengzhou down the mountain step by step, chatting with her. If you're cold, wrap the cloak tightly, don't let the wind in. You can also curl up in the cloak and sleep. His steps were steady as he spoke. Chapter 1336. Feeling her eyelids getting heavier, she pressed her face against his neck and fell into a deep sleep. Xianyuan Mose, who was walking slowly, felt her warm breath on his neck. He couldn't help but pause in his steps. He turned his head slightly and glanced at her. Seeing that she had already fallen asleep, he didn't say anything and continued walking slowly. He walked very slowly and steadily, as if he was carrying the entire world on his back. He was careful not to wake her up. As for the woman who was sleeping soundly on his back, she also fell asleep peacefully. With him by her side, she never had to worry about anything else. Hui Lang, who was waiting outside the residence, saw that the sky had darkened and the two still hadn't returned. He couldn't help but feel a little worried. Logically speaking, they were just going to watch the sunset, so they should have already reached the residence by now. At this time, the stars in the night sky were twinkling and the moon was shining brightly, but the two still hadn't returned. Why don't we wait outside the city? Hui Lang looked at Ying Yi beside him and said. With Master's strength and the ghost doctor's strength, even ghosts and serpents would have to take a detour. Ying Yi crossed his arms in front of him and leaned against the door. That's true. Hui Lang nodded. With their strength, anyone who met them would have to turn around and leave. Only those who didn't have eyes would choose to attack them. You're back. Ying Yi's voice sounded. Where? Grey Wolf hurriedly turned his head to look and saw his master's familiar figure slowly walking out of the night with a person on his back. Seeing this, he hurriedly ran forward. Moss. Just as he was about to speak, he was stopped by a look. Seeing this, he glanced at the sleeping ghost doctor. She was sleeping soundly on his master's back, so he lowered his voice and asked, Master, do you want me to bring the ghost doctor in? He saw that his master's feet were covered in thick mud. It was obvious that he had walked back. If he had walked back from Chaoyang Mountain, the journey wouldn't have been short. It was quite tiring to carry a person like this all the time. Who knew that his good intentions would only be met with a cold gaze from his master? Go get someone to prepare water for a bath. As he spoke, he walked past him. Hui Lang scratched his head and looked at Ying Yi. Did I say something wrong again? Ying Yi glanced at him and turned to enter the residence. At the same time, he said, Why are you being so attentive to the ghost doctor? Hui Lang was stunned. He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything for a long time. He only had good intentions. How was he trying to curry favor for no reason? As soon as they entered the residence, Fengzhou, who was sleeping on Xianyuan Mose's back, woke up. When she opened her eyes in a daze, she saw that they were already inside the residence. She couldn't help but be startled. We're here. We're home, I'll take you to the room to sleep. Xianyuan Mose slightly tilted his head to look at her, his lips revealing a doting smile. Put me down, put me down. She struggled to jump down. When she saw the thick layer of mud beside his boots, she couldn't help but blink. She then looked at the sky and asked, You didn't come back on your sword? The wind is too strong when I come back on my sword. As he spoke, he rubbed his sore arms. You idiot. She glared at him and said with heartache, Then you could have told me to get up. How tiring would it be to walk back from there? As she spoke, she patted her head. It's all my fault. If I didn't let you carry me, it would have been better. Idiot. Xianyuan Mose laughed as he held her hand. If I couldn't carry you, how would I dare to marry you? Chapter 1337. How are they two different things? Carrying you on my back means that you are my responsibility. I have to bring you home. Alright, let's not talk about it anymore. I'll have someone prepare a bath. You just woke up, so you should slowly take a bath. I'll go take a bath first. He held her hand and walked step by step towards the main courtyard. Fengjiu turned her head to look at him. Hearing his words and seeing him tightly holding her hand, her heart couldn't help but tremble. She didn't say anything, only tightly holding his hand and following him to the main courtyard. When they arrived at the main courtyard, the two of them first ate a few pieces of pastries to fill their stomachs before going into their own rooms to take a bath. Fengjiu didn't soak for long. After soaking for a while, she got up, put on her casual clothes, and walked out of the room, heading towards Xianyuan Mo's room. The hidden guards in the courtyard had already been evacuated 10 meters away. Ying Yi and Hui Lang were also guarding the courtyard. As for the servant girls, they had already been sent back to their rooms. Thus, she stealthily pushed open the door and entered. Inside the bathtub, Xianyuan Mo, who was resting against the wall, already knew that she had come. Thus, he closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, waiting to see what she wanted to do. Fengjiu, who had softly walked in, poked her head out. When she saw the naked figure behind the screen with his hands on the edge of the bathtub, lying on his back with his eyes closed, she couldn't help but gulp. She couldn't move her eyes away. There was no movement for a while, but he could feel that woman's gaze was like a wolf sizing up his body. This made Xianyuan Mo feel a bit nervous, even his body tensed up. He felt like even the bathtub couldn't block her hot gaze. His heart felt strange. This woman, she clearly didn't want to look, but liked to hide on the side and watch. It was fine if she just watched, but watching for a while should be enough, right? Was she addicted to watching? If she was addicted to watching, why didn't she know how to use her hands? What was the use of just watching without any tricks? You're not going to come up and touch me. He suddenly opened his eyes, staring at her with a teasing gaze. Fengjiu chuckled and poked her head out. Her eyes sparkled as she looked at him and said, "Didn't you carry me back? I thought that I should repay you, so I came over." Hearing this, he raised his eyebrows and a dark light flashed in his eyes. "Repay me? How are you going to repay me?" Although his tone was steady, it was difficult to conceal the fluctuations in his voice. "I'll wait for you on the bed." As she spoke, she turned and left. Xianyuan Mo's heart instantly heated up when he heard those seductive words. Even his lower abdomen faintly surged with an impulse, and his breathing became slightly rough because of it. This woman's guts have grown big. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled, calming the impulse and fire in his heart. He couldn't help but imagine the scene that was about to unfold, thinking of the sexy and hot scene that he couldn't refuse. His ears couldn't help but turn slightly red. He could feel the heat in his ears. He rubbed his red and hot ears, then scooped up a handful of water and patted his thumping heart. He felt that the corners of his lips had unconsciously revealed an expectant smile. His face stiffened, and he shyly tightened his face, trying to maintain his usual appearance. No, he was a bit colder than usual. He eased up a step, then stood up from the water with a splash. After wiping the water off his body, he put on his bathrobe and tied the belt, then walked into the room. Chapter 1338. When he walked out, Fengjiu's eyes moved and a look of admiration flashed in her eyes. A handsome man coming out of the bath was just like this. She saw that his naked body was only covered by a loose bathrobe. The belt of the bathrobe was tied around the waist, perfectly covering his body to prevent it from leaking out. His lower body only revealed his strong and slender calves. Looking at the slightly curly leg hair on his calves, she blinked her eyes and moved up again. Her gaze fell on his upper body that faintly revealed his 8-pack abs. Sparkling and translucent water dripped down from his hair and onto his chest, making him look even more attractive than delicious food. Looking up, his rolling throat, firm chin, slightly pursed sexy thin lips, handsome and outstanding face, and bottomless black eyes all exuded the masculine charm of a mature man. "Come, over here." She sat on the bed and patted the spot on the bed beside her, indicating for him to come over. Seeing this, a certain proud and shy man glanced at her. Suppressing the anticipation in his heart, he looked away with red ears and coughed softly. A low and hoarse voice came out of his mouth. "This doesn't seem good." Although he wanted to, it was indeed not good for her. After all, they were not married yet. "No, come." She smiled and narrowed her eyes. "Hurry up, don't dawdle." Hearing this, he glanced at her. "Are you serious?" "Of course, do you think I'm teasing you?" She raised her eyebrows and a smirk appeared on her lips. But he frowned and said with anticipation and nervousness, "It's my first time and I don't have much experience. I'm worried that you won't be satisfied." "It's okay, I'll make you satisfied." She resisted the urge to laugh and hooked her finger at him. Hearing this, even his face turned red. Only then did he walk forward stiffly. Because he was too nervous and expectant, even his mind was dizzy. He did not dare to believe the scene in front of him. Until he sat down beside her with a stiff body, for a moment, he did not know what to do. "Lie down on the bed." She stood up and gestured. Seeing this, he didn't ask any more questions. He lay down on the bed with his back facing her. He was puzzled. What was she doing? Thus, he tilted his head slightly to look at her. He saw her climb onto the bed and sit on his arm. He felt her weight pressing down on him and her soft body, he felt his blood rush to his head, and he quickly lay back on the pillow and closed his eyes. However, he opened them in the next moment because he found that his senses were more sensitive after he closed his eyes, and his mind couldn't stop moving. Fine. This was the nature of men. Even if it was him, in front of the woman he loved, he could not resist her waves of temptation and teasing. He felt that it was good enough that he did not have a nosebleed. Fengjiu glanced at him and reached out to untie the belt of the bathrobe around his waist with a faint smile. With this tug, the bathrobe was untied, and he felt the person beneath him stiffen even more. He couldn't help but laugh inwardly. First time. Yes, she believed that the degree of his innocence was already incomparable to that of ordinary people. Also, this guy was a bit of a clean freak. She remembered that when she accidentally kissed him in Jufulin, he was so scared that he fainted. Relax. Look, your entire body is stiff. It's as hard as a rock. She patted his back and then took off half of his bathrobe, revealing his well-defined and strong back. Chapter 1339. Handsome men were indeed pleasing to the eye. She swallowed her saliva and felt her eyes sparkle. "Let me help you dry your hair first." As she said this, she took a towel from the head of the bed and wrapped his wet hair in it. She used a bit of spiritual power in her hands to rub it. After a while, the water was dry. She watched as his black hair slid down like silk in her hands. It was soft and mesmerizing like black silk. She played with it for a while, then pulled his black hair to the side. She rubbed her hands with a bit of 100-flower essential oil and moved her muscles. She laughed and said, "Then I'm going to start." As soon as she said this, she placed her hands on his shoulders. Her strength gradually increased as she slowly massaged his shoulders. Xianyuan Mose couldn't help but let out a comfortable groan. He felt her soft hands on his shoulders, and his stiff shoulders relaxed. He closed his eyes comfortably. Comfortable, right? She smiled with her eyes narrowed. Her hands pressed down from his shoulders to both sides. Then she placed his hands that were holding the pillow by his side and pressed down from his shoulders to his wrists. Comfortable. He replied with his eyes narrowed. His entire body was completely relaxed and he let her do as she pleased. Comfortable is good. After pressing down on his shoulders and hands, she moved her hands to his back and used a special method to press down on the acupuncture points on his back. When her hands went down from his waist to his waist, the originally relaxed Xianyuan Mo's suddenly quivered. He opened his eyes and turned his head. "I don't need to press on this waist, right?" he asked. This place was sensitive. For a man, a woman's hands messing around there was simply like lighting a fire. How can that be? This waist needs to be pressed. She turned around and prepared to continue pressing. This time, she rubbed her hands with a bit of 100-flower essential oil. When she touched his waist, she saw that his body was covered in goosebumps. She couldn't help but laugh out loud. "What are you doing? Why are you having goosebumps?" "It's a bit itchy," he said in a muffled voice. His ears, which had returned to normal due to the comfort and relaxation, turned red again. "Itchy? Don't worry, I'll give you something that won't itch." She narrowed her eyes with a sly smile. She covered his arms with the bathrobe, covering his body so that she wouldn't be distracted and her eyes would wander around. She then sat on his waist, hooked his legs with both hands and pulled him up. Ah! The sudden exclamation almost made Ying Yi and Hui Lang, who were guarding outside the courtyard, rush in. But when they thought about what the two people inside were doing, they could only hold back their footsteps and shout inside. "Master? Are you alright?" "It's okay, don't make a fuss." Fengjiu's voice came out, and he pulled on his tendons again. All of the charming and dreamy atmosphere was shattered at this moment. The scene that was previously filled with a warm and ambiguous atmosphere was now replaced by sweat on the forehead of Xianyuan Mo's, who was groaning on the bed due to the strain. It hurt, it really hurt too much. When she pulled on his legs, the tendons in his legs seemed to be stretched, making it impossible for him not to cry out. What's more, her movements were so sudden. This sudden change in style made him stare blankly. After a while, when he heard the giggles behind him, he realized that he had misunderstood again. Chapter 1340. About half an hour later, he lay on the bed and looked at the woman who had jumped off the bed. He took a deep breath and slowly said, "Next time, if you want to massage me, just say it directly." Fengjiu chuckled, "I didn't say anything else, you're the one who's thinking the wrong way." Xianyuan Mo's face was embarrassed. He looked away and didn't look at her again, but he muttered in his heart, "You said it so ambiguously, how could he not think the wrong way?" "Well, it's getting late, I have to go back and rest." She smiled and walked out, saying, "If it weren't for the fact that you carried me back, I wouldn't have massaged you. Your body is as hard as a rock. My hands are sore from massaging you." Opening the door, she saw Hui Lang and Ying Yi standing outside the room. When they saw her come out, they quickly stepped back. She glanced at the two and asked, "What have you two been whispering about?" He, nothing, we're just curious, what are you doing inside?" Hui Lang smiled, but couldn't help but ask. Fengjiu hooked up the corners of her mouth, revealing a sly smile. She lowered her voice and said, "Your master is inside, you'll know when you go in." Saying this, she walked past the two into the room. Seeing her go back to her room, Hui Lang glanced at his master's room. He was curious and wanted to take a step forward, but was stopped by Ying Yi. "You really want to go in?" Ying Yi glanced at him, "Ghost Doctor is tricking you. How many times have you been tricked by her? Why can't you learn to be smarter?" "It seems that the two of them aren't doing that, so I'll go in and see my master," Hui Lang said matter-of-factly. He poked his head inside and called out, "Master! Master! Get out!" A loud shout rang out, accompanied by a wave of pressure. The two of them were startled and quickly retreated. Hui Lang scratched his head and said with some doubt, "Could it be that my master has been suppressed for too long? You see, his temper isn't very good, it's a bit like that, what's it like?" Ying Yi walked out, ignoring him. If he was with Hui Lang, he would be unlucky as well. It was better to keep a distance. Xianyuan Mose, who was in the room, originally thought that he wouldn't be able to sleep. Who knew that after being massaged by Fengjiu, his whole body felt very comfortable, especially his muscles and bones. Sleepiness came over him, and he fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, Yang Yong personally brought breakfast to the main courtyard and placed it in the middle of the courtyard. He also had the servants add a few side dishes. He looked at the two people on a big tree in the main courtyard. Ing Yi crossed her arms and hugged her sword. She seemed to be sleeping, while Hui Lang was leaning against a tree trunk and snoring. Seeing this, he looked at Ing Yi. Did Master and the others sleep very late last night? I'm not too sure. Ing Yi shook her head and said, Ghost Doctor went back to her room early. As for Master, he didn't call us in, so I don't know. Hearing this, Yang Yong's expression changed slightly. He opened his mouth to say something, but saw the door open. Xianyuan Mose, dressed in a black robe, walked out. Is something the matter? He looked at Yang Yong and asked, then glanced at the food on the table. Chapter 1341. Tell that to Fengjiu. He walked out, preparing to go to the bamboo forest to practice his swordsmanship. Seeing this, Yang Yong could only agree. He watched as Ing Yi left with his master. Hui Lang was still sleeping in the tree, while he stayed in the courtyard to wait for Fengjiu to wake up. After half an hour, Fengjiu also woke up. She washed up and went out. She saw Yang Yong outside the courtyard. Housekeeper, why are you here? She looked around, but did not see Xianyuan Mose. She asked, where is he? Yang Yong bowed, then said, Master went to the bamboo forest to practice his swordsmanship. I am here to apologize. I am very sorry about yesterday. Fengjiu waved her hand, don't mention what happened yesterday, I didn't take it to heart. She walked forward and sat down at the stone table. Looking at the breakfast on the table, she raised her eyebrows, you prepared this? Yes. He smiled and nodded. It looks good. She propped up her chin with one hand. Ghost Doctor can eat first, I will have someone send another set to Master later. N. She did not wait for Xianyuan Mose, because she knew that he usually took around 2 hours to practice his swordsmanship. She ate first, and only asked Yang Yong to send a hot one over later. Yang Yong did not leave, but stayed in the courtyard. He sat at the table and looked at her, asking, Ghost Doctor is leaving tomorrow? Do you need me to send someone to escort you? No need. She waved her hand, I can travel by myself. She wiped the corners of her mouth and said, in the future, when I am not by his side, just take care of him a little more. Yes, Ghost Doctor, don't worry, we will. When Xianyuan Mose returned, he saw the two of them chatting in the courtyard. When he saw this, his gaze shifted slightly, and he walked in. Seeing Xianyuan Mose return, Yang Yong stood up, Master. Xianyuan Mose glanced at Yang Yong. Is there nothing to do outside? Yang Yong stared blankly for a moment, then smiled and said, Yes, I just remembered that there are still some things that I have yet to take care of. Master, Ghost Doctor, you two continue chatting. I'll take my leave first. After saying that, he left. After he left, Fengjiu smiled and said, the breakfast that Yang Yong sent over is not bad. When I ate it earlier, it was just warm. But I knew you wouldn't be back so early, so I didn't leave any for you. She looked at his handsome face and said with a smile, you sit for a while. He will have someone send some hot food over. Just as she said that, she saw him reach out and hold her hand. What's wrong? She asked, looking at him who was staring at her hand. I'm worried about you leaving alone. Over here, there were as many nascent soul cultivators as there were clouds. Although fairy realm cultivators were not everywhere, almost every family had a fairy realm cultivator in charge. If he left her alone outside, how could he not worry? Hearing this, she smiled. I said you don't have to worry about me. Even if I can't beat them, I will still run. Also, I will be careful and won't cause any trouble. Hearing this, he glanced at her and said bluntly, your words are not very trustworthy. Fengjiu was stunned, then laughed softly, all right, you don't have to worry. I can take care of myself. She did not want him to send someone to protect her in the dark. That would make her feel like she was being watched. Chapter 1342. Zay, you're so nice. She hugged his arm and said with a smile. You're my woman. If I'm not good to you, who should I be good to? He smiled and looked at her beside him. His heart was filled with reluctance and worry. Ah! A cry of surprise was heard. The two turned around and saw that Hui Lang, who had been sleeping on the tree, had accidentally flipped over and fell off the tree, landing on the ground. He groaned and lay on the ground for a long time before he got up. Feeling that they were looking at him, he raised his head and smiled embarrassedly. That, I didn't hear. I didn't eavesdrop on your conversation, really. Ying Yi, who was guarding outside the courtyard, rolled his eyes when he heard this. This was simply giving away 300 taels of silver. Xianyuan Mose and Fengjiu didn't argue with him about this. They glanced at him and then looked away. Seeing this, Hui Lang hurriedly walked out and patted his chest. Scared me to death, scared me to death. Ying Yi glanced at him and then silently looked away. Master and the ghost doctor were already used to him. Otherwise, this idiot's brain wouldn't be enough. On this day, Xianyuan Mose accompanied Fengjiu. The two cherished their last day together. They didn't have any miscellaneous matters to worry about, and only enjoyed the warmth and solitude of the two. The more they were separated, the more reluctant they were to part. However, time couldn't be held back. Until the next morning, when the sky was still dark, youth wearing shabby beggar clothes with messy hair and a face full of dust left the residence and headed towards the city gates. And at a high place in the residence, Xianyuan Mose, dressed in a black robe, stood with his hands behind his back as he watched the figure leave, half a month later. On this day, the sky gradually darkened. Fengjiu walked on a small path with a green foxtail in her mouth. She looked around as she walked. During this half a month of traveling on foot, she had traveled to many places. She had also experienced the customs of the various places in the Xianyuan Empire, seen many sceneries, and interacted with many people. In particular, it was too convenient for her to walk around in beggar clothes. No matter who it was, they would avoid her and not take a second look at her. After all, she looked messy and there was nothing to be desired. Therefore, she did not encounter any trouble along the way. Looking ahead, he seemed to see a small town in the distance. He was delighted. If there was a small town, then there would be hot food to eat. Immediately, he walked forward quickly. If being a beggar was safe and inconspicuous, then eating was a troublesome matter, because no restaurant would allow a beggar to enter and disturb the guests. Thinking that there was food to eat ahead, her footsteps became lighter and lighter. Not long after, she arrived at the small town. However, when she saw the empty small town, she could not help but be startled. Why is it different from what I imagined? She muttered softly as she walked inside. Her heart was on high alert. How could there be no one in a small town? This place looked like an ordinary village town, and there were grains planted around the road. Looking at those delightful grains, she felt that this place did not look like it was empty. Therefore, she walked in while shouting, "Is there anyone?" "There's." Chapter 1343. She saw a scarecrow standing on the left side of the field. The scarecrow didn't look like a common scarecrow. It was just a simple straw standing there. Instead, it wore flowery clothes and a pointed black hat on top of the straw. Both of its hands were spread out against the wind, and its back was facing her. The long flowery clothes covered the bamboo that supported the straw in the field. It was so dark that it looked like someone was carrying her on his back. However, the person's body was stiff and full of strangeness. She steadied her mind and looked away. However, when her gaze landed on a spot, her breath froze. She saw a figure lying in the field soaked in water. In the dim light, she could vaguely see that it was a child of about 4 or 5 years old. However, when she scanned it with her divine sense, she couldn't detect any signs of life. Dead? A thought popped into her mind. She walked over from the road to the other side. Walking on the small path in the field, her shoes stepped on the wet mud and it was a little troublesome to walk. However, when she arrived there to take a look, she was stunned and frowned slightly. From afar, it looked like a child. However, when she looked closer, she realized that it was a rag doll. It was a rag doll that was sewn with tattered clothes. It was about the size of a 4 or 5-year-old child and it was lying there with its face down. She took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. She raised her eyes and looked into the distance. Because the sky was dark, she could only vaguely see that there were scarecrows standing in the wind in many places. In this pitch-black place without any smoke or fire, it was filled with a strange aura. She left the small path and returned to the original path. She rubbed her feet on the dry sand on the ground and rubbed away the red mud on the soles of her shoes. Then, she continued to walk forward. After walking for a while, she saw an abandoned rag doll on the road. The rag doll was made to look like a 4 or 5-year-old child, but the clothes on it were different. What was even stranger was that the rag doll's face looked as if it had makeup on and it was even grinning. The rag doll's face had eyebrows, eyes, a nose, a mouth, and red cheeks. It looked very strange no matter how she looked at it. After walking for a while, she saw some broken dolls on the side of the road from time to time. There were also some headless dolls that were carelessly thrown on the side of the road. Listening to the sound of insects in the night, she frowned. She was the only one in this empty place. Occasionally, strange and creepy things would appear, causing her to pause her footsteps. It was pitch black inside. It was said to be a small town, but she couldn't see a single person. There should be no one here. It was better for her not to go in. Moreover, this strange and terrifying feeling made her feel uncomfortable all over. Thinking of this, she decided to take advantage of the fact that she had just entered to leave. However, just as she was about to turn around and leave, she suddenly heard a hoarse and old voice. He must be a foreigner. That voice that came out of nowhere gave her a fright. When that hoarse and old voice suddenly came out of nowhere, anyone would be frightened. In particular, she had clearly probed the surrounding area earlier, and there was not the slightest bit of human aura. How could a person suddenly appear? Therefore, with vigilance, she looked in the direction of the voice. Chapter 1344. Looking at it, it was as if the red lantern was the only thing moving towards her in the dark night. However, as the lantern neared her, a hunchbacked old woman in black clothes holding the red lantern also entered her sight. Seeing the strange appearance of the old woman, she sized her up without batting an eyelid. Then, she opened her mouth and asked, "Old lady, are you from this small town?" The hunchbacked old woman raised her eyes to look at Fengjiu, then turned around and walked back. "This is not the place to talk, follow me." Seeing this, Fengjiu hesitated for a moment, but still followed her. "Big sister, don't go, big sister, play with me." Suddenly, a voice came from behind her, causing her hair to stand on end. Her entire body trembled. She saw that the rag dolls that had been abandoned by the roadside and in the fields actually seemed to come alive under the moonlight. One by one, they crawled up and surrounded her. "Big sister, don't go, big sister, play with me." A rag doll walked stiffly towards her, its eyebrows drooping. It pursed its lips and said, "Big sister, play with me, play with me." Whoosh! While she was still in a daze, the hunchbacked old woman with the red lantern pinched a spark from the red lantern and flicked it towards the surroundings. For a moment, cries of shock and hatred filled the air. Ah! Ghost Granny, hateful Ghost Granny. The rag doll that was coming towards her was hit by the fireball and let out a hiss. It fell to the ground and wailed like a ghost. That sound made one's hair stand on end. Let's go. The hunchbacked old woman in front said, then slowly moved forward with the red lantern in her hand. Fengjiu calmed himself down, glanced at the figure, and followed her until they arrived at a place that looked like an ancestral hall. Sit anywhere. The hunchbacked old woman said, then hung the lantern up and went to the back. Not long after, she came back with 2 pancakes and handed them to Fengjiu. Thank you. As she spoke, she took one of the pieces but did not eat it. Instead, she asked, Elder, why is this place so strange? Yes, strange. From the moment she entered this place, she had not sensed any yin qi. It did not seem like a place where lonely souls wandered around. However, those dolls just now seemed to have come alive as if they had been possessed by ghosts. However, she clearly did not sense any ghosts. Since there were no ghosts, then what were they? That's a wraith. As the hunchbacked old woman spoke, she took a bite of the biscuit and said, Wraiths aren't ghosts, but they are similar to ghosts. The difference is that ghosts are of the yin attribute and like the cold and gloomy, while wraiths like to attach themselves to people with heavy grievances. Hearing this, Fengjiu was slightly startled. He lowered his head and glanced at himself. With a strange expression, he said, I have resentment on me. There shouldn't be any, right? How could there be resentment on her body? The hunchbacked old woman glanced at her and said in a hoarse and old voice, If you had resentment on you, you wouldn't have been able to walk in here. You wouldn't have lived to see me. Then what's the reason? Those wraiths actually asked me to play with them. Just thinking about the scene just now made her hair stand on end. It was too strange. Chapter 1345. You have a pure spiritual aura. The old woman looked at Fengjiu. You're not a beggar, are you? A beggar would definitely not have such a pure spiritual aura. Hearing this, Fengjiu's expression changed slightly. He glanced at the old woman and nodded, Yes, I'm outside alone. It's safer to change into a beggar's outfit. Sister, sister, play with me, sister, play with me. The childlike voice came from outside again. That voice carried traces of crying faintly. However, compared to the pitch black outside, in this ancestral hall with lanterns and candlelight, that voice was much less terrifying. She looked outside and asked, Why can't they come in? This place did not look special, so why did those resentful spirits not dare to come in? Because they're afraid that I'll refine them, so they don't dare to come in. The hunchbacked old woman said as she continued to eat the biscuit. Hearing this, Fengjiu was startled. Refine them? How? The old woman raised her dark eyes and looked at her. Instead of answering, she asked, Do you know where the resentful spirits come from? I don't know. She shook her head honestly. She really did not know. She only knew that there were ghosts. Who knew that there were these things called resentful spirits? They did not have any ghost aura at all. Who knew where they came from? Ghosts are the souls of people after they die. They are called ghosts, but vengeful spirits are spiritual beings born from resentment. To put it bluntly, they are just like some treasured swords that have sword spirits. They are born from the sword and are the guardian spirits of the sword. However, vengeful spirits are far inferior to spiritual beings like sword spirits because they have resentment. Fengjiu listened. She said a lot, but still did not tell her why the resentful spirits were afraid that she would refine them. Just as she was thinking about it, she stood up and slowly walked outside after finishing the pancakes. Seeing this, she also followed. She saw many cloth dolls standing or squatting outside. Even the scarecrows had come. They surrounded and shouted outside not far away. She was very surprised to see this. What made her even more surprised was that a black shadow flashed in front of her. The hunchbacked old woman reached out and grabbed a cloth doll. She guided it with one hand, as if she was pulling something away. Ah! Granny Ghost is so scary. The rag dolls and scarecrows that were originally surrounding the old woman cried out in alarm and quickly dispersed. Not a single one of them was left behind, leaving only the ball of cloth that was struggling in the old woman's hand. Just as she was astonished by the change in the scene, she saw that within a few breaths, the old woman's hand seemed to be guiding something as she pulled out a ball of light from the rag doll and pinched it in her hand. That feeling, to her, was as casual as pinching a rag. Ah! Help! Ghost Granny is so scary. That ball of light that looked like cotton candy jumped around. It wanted to escape but couldn't. It was pinched flat in his hand and walked back. Was that ball of light a vengeful spirit? She was slightly startled and found it hard to believe. Those that were related to the word spirit were indeed much better looking than those that were related to ghosts. At the very least, this ball of light was pleasing to the eye. Moreover, this old woman was really powerful. She was actually able to grab the vengeful spirit and pull it out with just one move. Chapter 1346. The hunchbacked old woman rubbed her hands together and crushed the ball of light formed by the vengeful spirit into a ball before stuffing it into her mouth. She smacked her lips and swallowed it just like that. She opened her mouth wide in disbelief. She ate it? She thought in a daze. The hunchbacked old woman's body, which originally had no spiritual power surging, emitted wisps of hot smoke at this moment. The heat from her body was like an open stove, and even she, who was standing at the side, could feel the heat emanating from her body. She rubbed her stomach with her hand, and a surge of spiritual power condensed in her palm. After about half an hour, she burped, and the heat on her body gradually dissipated. Then, she opened her mouth and spat out a fist-sized ball of light. This is that she looked at the ball of light, which had shrunk by nearly half, in surprise. This was the resentful spirit. Although the resentful spirit from before was also a ball of light, that ball of light was stained with traces of black aura. However, the ball of light in front of her was snow white, without any trace of black aura. Could this be the refinement she was talking about? Chirp. The fist-sized ball of light in the hunchbacked old woman's hand gradually condensed and took shape. It rolled around like a cotton flower and let out a chirp. Then, a small baby-like face emerged from the snow-white ball of light. Chirp chirp. She stared blankly at the little thing that was as white as a cotton flower. It was actually blinking its clear eyes and chirping at her like a little beast. She couldn't help but be stunned. This is a vengeful spirit. This is a resentful spirit that has been refined. A resentful spirit without resentment is no longer a resentful spirit. The old woman placed the flower-like ball of light in Fengjiu's hand. If it's not a resentful spirit, then what is it? She looked at the ball of light in her hand. It was actually a solid object, and not just a ball of light. The snow-white thing in her hand was just like what she had seen. It was as soft as a cotton flower. When she rubbed it, it actually turned into a ball. Even that little face was rubbed into it. However, when that little thing was tossed aside, that little face popped out again. That little face was so cute that she simply could not bear to part with it. Yuanling. The old woman walked in slowly and said, "The spirit of the primordial beginning is a pure spirit that is not tainted by any evil or resentment. It is called the primordial spirit." Primordial spirit. Fengjiu muttered softly as she looked at the pure, snow-white ball of light in her hand. In her eyes, it looked like a ball of cotton flowers. She opened her hand and saw the little thing jumping around in her hand. It was not afraid of strangers, nor was it afraid of her. That's right. A refined origin spirit can be used as a pill spirit. When you add it into a pill, the grade and medicinal properties of the pill will be greatly improved. Not only that, but the origin spirit can also be fused into an artifact spirit. You can even infuse it into any object to form an artifact spirit. Hearing this, Fengjiu frowned and said, "Why haven't I heard of it before? Moreover, wasn't it said that something similar to an artifact spirit was formed by the artifact and was born from the artifact? If that's the case, artifact spirits wouldn't be so rare. You can perform spirit refinement?" The hoarse and aged voice rang out. She was startled for a moment. Recalling the scene of her directly swallowing the vengeful spirit, she could not help but shake her head, "No." Chapter 1347. Fengjiu shook her head again. No. She had only met ghosts. The old woman sat down and said, "The people in this town have moved away a long time ago because there are resentful spirits here. They thought they were ghosts, so they hired a Taoist priest to deal with them, but they couldn't deal with them. In the end, they could only move away." Hearing her answer the first question she had asked, Fengjiu's eyes moved slightly, and she quietly listened. This hunchbacked old woman gave her a very strange feeling, like a hidden expert who had withdrawn from the world in the countryside. Everyone in this town had left, and she was the only one who had stayed. In this kind of place, an old woman was living alone, and the only person who accompanied her was the resentful spirit outside. The so-called spirit enhancement was a method she had never seen or heard of. Swallowing that resentful spirit and using her own body as a furnace, she could really refine a pure, snow-white original spirit like a cotton flower. From her words, it seemed that she had long seen through her identity as a woman, and also knew that she was an alchemist. Otherwise, she wouldn't have told her that the original spirit could be refined into a pill. However, why would such a person tell her these things? What she said was like spreading her knowledge, telling her things she had never come into contact with. For a person who had just met her, saying these things seemed a little abnormal. However, she didn't feel any killing intent from her. Even so, she still felt a faint uneasiness in her heart, because the person in front of her was unfathomable, making her feel like she was in danger. Her sixth sense had always been very accurate, and it was because of this that she felt that this old woman was strange. However, although she was vigilant in her heart and secretly guarded against this old woman, she didn't show it on her face. Even her actions and expressions showed that this old woman was a good person who had helped her. Yes, up until now, she had indeed helped her, so it was normal for her to show trust and gratitude. "They have all moved away, but I like it here, and have lived here for many years, so I can't bear to leave." Saying this, she raised her head, and her eyes that were like dry wells calmly glanced at Fengjiu. It was clearly a very ordinary glance, but in Fengjiu's eyes, that glance seemed to have a different meaning. When that glance fell on her body, her heart sank slightly, but she smiled and narrowed her eyes, and said in a light tone, "Many things are habits, like me, I like to wear beggar clothes and walk around. And, it's all habits." The hunchbacked old woman replied, and lowered her head to hide her eyes. She pulled out a toothpick-sized red thread from her sleeve, and sat there, tying it. Seeing this, Fengjiu took out the cake that the old woman had given her. She looked at the sesame seeds sprinkled on the cake, and her eyes flashed. She took a bite. "Old man, why can your body be used as a furnace? If that's the case, won't your body be unable to take it?" she asked while eating the cake. She raised her head to look at Fengjiu, and said slowly in an old voice, "No, because my body is a furnace." "Then what about this original soul?" She pointed at the little thing that was as white as a cotton flower on her shoulder. "This little thing is like this? It seems to like me." Chapter 1348. Fengjiu lowered her eyes, hiding the light that flashed through her eyes. Because her aura was clean. This was not the first time the old woman had said this. "Old woman, how is this resentful spirit formed?" Her voice was soft and slow, with a trace of curiosity. "It is formed by gathering the essence of heaven and earth. The first resentful spirit formed is a primordial spirit. It has no fixed residence and drifts everywhere. After it swallows resentment, it becomes a resentful spirit." Her old and hoarse voice paused, looking at Fengjiu. "Little girl, do you have anything else to ask?" "Yes." She stood up with one hand on her stomach, wrinkling her face. "Old woman, where's the outhouse? My stomach hurts a little." The old woman glanced at her, pointing to the side with her skinny hand. "Go straight there and turn around." "Oh, I thought it was behind." She looked at the back of the ancestral hall. "Then you better not go in behind." As the old woman spoke, she lowered her head and tied the red rope in her hand. "It's best not to go outside. It's troublesome to be entangled by resentful spirits." "Okay, I know. I'll be back in a while." As she spoke, she walked in the direction the old woman pointed, still holding the refined primordial spirit in her hand. When she was out of the line of sight of the people behind her, her harmless expression changed. Her eyes narrowed, and her face turned cold. She did not look back as she walked. She put the primordial spirit in her hand into the space. After putting it away, she came to the so-called outhouse. She crossed the outhouse and quickly rushed out of the town under the cover of the night. This place was dangerous. That old woman was even more dangerous. Her intuition told her that if she did not escape now, she would not be able to escape. "Sister, sister, play with me, sister. Sister, sister, don't go, play with me, play with me." In the darkness of the night, the rag dolls chased after her. Childish voices rang out from behind her, echoing in the darkness of the night. It was an extremely eerie sight. "Sister, play with me, play with me." Fengjiu looked back and saw that in addition to the rag dolls and scarecrows chasing after her, there were several balls of light dyed with black gas flying towards her. "Stop chasing me. If you keep chasing me, I won't hold back anymore." She didn't know how to perform spirit refinement, but it was more than enough to deal with them. However, doing so would definitely consume her physical strength and spiritual power. Before she was out of danger, she had to prioritize her survival. That old woman is too dangerous. She is too powerful. She is not a nascent soul realm cultivator, but a fairy realm cultivator. She had only seen fairy realm experts, but she had never exchanged blows with a fairy realm expert before. Thus, she couldn't do something that she had no confidence in. "Sister, play with me, play with me." Her speed was extremely fast, and she didn't stop at all as she rushed out of the town. When she could faintly see the town gate through the moonlight, she increased her speed again. Almost there. After leaving the strange town, the old woman probably wouldn't chase after him anymore. However, at this moment, an old and hoarse voice sounded from behind her. That voice was slightly strange, as if it was echoing in the sky and clearly entered her ears. "Little girl, where are you going?" A black figure came from behind her like a ghost. In a flash, it was so fast that only the sound of black clothes could be heard. Because of the old woman's appearance, the vengeful spirits that were following behind Fengjiu cried out in alarm. Chapter 1349. Fengjiu only felt a gust of cold wind sweep past her. The wind was so strong, and the wind blade was so sharp that it swept her away with a swoosh. She took advantage of the momentum to do a somersault in the air and steadied herself. She then looked at the figure who was standing 3 meters away from her. The old woman's black robes fluttered in the night wind and made a whistling sound. Her back was hunched and she held a white walking stick with both hands. On top of the walking stick was a small baby's skull. Her entire aura changed and became cold and bloodthirsty. Her eyes, which were as dry as a well, had a strange blood-red color. She stared at Fengjiu and said, "Little girl, it's dangerous outside. Come back with me quickly." However, Fengjiu took one look at her and quickly retreated. She turned around and ran in the other direction. "Don't run. You can't escape." A faint and hoarse voice rang out in the wind. Strange laughter rang out in the night sky. The old woman looked at the figure who was running into the night sky, and her aged voice carried a trace of excitement. "Ultimate spiritual body. How rare. I really want it. I really want it." At the same time, she raised the walking stick in her hand and shook it on the ground. In an instant, 2 streams of blood gushed out from the 2 eye sockets of the human skull. They flowed down the skull until the blood seeped into the ground. The pitch-black ground changed in an instant. It was as if something had been lit up. Streaks of blood-red light seeped out from the ground and intertwined to form a large net. It spread towards Fengjiu. Fengjiu, who was running away, heard the words behind her and her heart trembled. This old witch knew that she had the ultimate spiritual body. How did she know? Did she target her because of this? No matter what, she had to get out of here first. However, as she was running away, she suddenly saw a large net of blood spread out on the ground. The blood was glowing red and intertwined to form a large net that spread out in all directions. She narrowed her eyes and was shocked. Is that blood? In such a place, there was actually so much blood hidden under the ground. She had been here for so long but did not detect the slightest smell of blood. Could it be a barrier? The blood underground had been sealed and solidified by the enchantment. Once the seal was undone and the enchantment was broken, the blood underground could no longer be suppressed and began to rise. However, why did the blood form such a strange net of blood? She turned around and saw the old woman standing there and staring at her while laughing. Her voice was sharp and piercing. It gradually grew louder and louder with spiritual energy in the night sky. "Little girl, you can't escape. Don't waste your energy. Be good and come back." The old woman's eyes where she was standing. Of the blood of the place where she was escaping. At this moment, the blood net that was woven from the blood on the ground extended in front of her and actually turned back. It was as if a large net was about to close up and trap her in the middle. Chapter 1350. His figure dashed out of the blood web and disappeared into the night in a few breaths of time. The old woman's eyes flashed. She looked at the big hole burned by the flames and then looked into the night. After a long time, she laughed in a low voice. "I didn't expect you to have some ability. You even managed to break the blood web. As expected of someone with a profound spiritual body, you're different. However, you can't escape." With that, she went in search of Fengjiu. However, when she kept moving forward and released her divine sense, she couldn't feel the slightest fluctuation of spiritual energy. She couldn't help but be surprised. "Disappeared? Did you hide? Do you want to play hide-and-seek with this old woman?" Her hoarse voice spread out in the night and drifted in all directions along with the night wind. Under her feet was the blood web that was intertwined with the surging blood, and it was the blood that was pushing her forward. "Come out. This area has been covered with blood webs. You can't escape." At this moment, Fengjiu, who had restrained her aura, was hiding in a tree behind a dilapidated house. She panted on the tree and looked at the old woman searching for her from afar. She saw that under the old woman's control, a huge blood web spread out from the ground in the dark and deserted town, causing the originally strange town to look even more terrifying. Ring, ring, ring. Suddenly, the clear sound of a bell rang in her ears. She looked down and saw that it was the bell on her waist that her sworn sister had given her. It was said that only she could hear the sound of the bell and it would only ring when a ghost appeared. She reached out and lifted the bell on her waist to take a look. The sound went from weak to strong, from slow to fast. When the urgent sound rang in her ears, she stood on the tree and looked over. Within the net of blood, shadows began to condense from the blood. There were figures of various sizes, men and women, and some of them were struggling in the blood. Looking at this scene, she could almost imagine the miserable appearance of the entire town being drained of blood by the old woman. Regardless of whether it was the adults or the children, not a single one of them would be spared. Within the blood web, figures floated about and wailed. Their cries were like that of wolves and ghosts, causing one's heart to sink. Due to the release of the seal and the surging of the blood web, this place, which originally did not have a trace of Yin and ghost chi, had become like hell on earth. It was eerie and terrifying. Her hands involuntarily clenched into fists as anger welled up in her heart. So many ghosts, so many people. They had all died here. What do you mean all the villagers in this town have moved away? What did he mean by she was the only one left who couldn't bear to leave? They were all lies. Even if all the people in this town had moved away, they couldn't possibly have moved away so cleanly. Furthermore, they couldn't possibly have turned this town into a ghostly place. Also, how could someone who had never left this town have the oil sesame cake from Huang County? Did they really think that she was a 3-year-old child who could be fooled? Chapter 1351. How many lives were lost in a small town like this? How many people's blood had been used to create that eye-catching net of blood? The anger in her heart gave her the urge to fight. She wanted to destroy this old woman. However, she was also weighing her own strength. She was considering whether she had enough power to deal with a fairy realm powerhouse. Just as she was deep in thought, the old woman in the net of blood raised her walking stick made of human skulls into the sky. A ray of bloody light shot up into the sky, causing the entire sky to swirl. Fengjiu watched as the ray of bloody light shot up into the sky and formed a compass that spiraled above. A powerful airflow surged, and a wave of spiritual energy spread out from the sky, resonating with the blood net on the ground. When she saw this scene, she couldn't help but gasp and cry out in alarm, this is the inescapable net? As the saying goes, there is no escape from the inescapable net. Even she couldn't set up the inescapable net. However, this old woman had actually set up such an inescapable net. It looked like she was determined to capture her. The mysterious spiritual body. Back then, her master had told her that she couldn't let outsiders know about the mysterious spiritual body. Otherwise, she would be killed. She had always been careful to hide it. However, she didn't expect that this strange old woman would find out about it. Now, she was in such a desperate situation. She didn't have 100% confidence that she could defeat her opponent and leave this place alive. She had no one to call for help and nowhere to run. It was as if she had fallen into a desperate situation. She could only rely on herself. Since I can't avoid it, then let's fight. She murmured softly. Although she could hide in the space, it wasn't a wise move to do so under such circumstances. If she made a mistake, even the space would be exposed. Moreover, even if she hid in the space, she still couldn't leave this small town. After thinking about it again and again, the only thing she could do was to risk it all. However, how was she going to break the inescapable net? She furrowed her brows as she pondered. She looked at the bloody net and then at the inescapable net that was spinning in the sky. A powerful aura filled the air. If it wasn't for her ancient aura, it would be difficult for her to even walk in this place. The inescapable net is a trap. Since that's the case, I can only start with that old woman. She stared at the figure in the distance. At this moment, the old woman seemed to have noticed her and looked in her direction. Little girl, didn't I say that you wouldn't be able to escape? Come on. Quick, let me have a good look. The old woman chuckled softly. Her hoarse and sharp voice rang through the air. Even though they were separated by a great distance, the voice seemed to echo in Fengjiu's ears. Since I can't escape, let's fight." Her clear and cold voice was filled with sharpness. She tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and leaped into the air. She no longer suppressed her might and aura and released it completely. As soon as the aura of a nascent soul stage powerhouse spread out, an intimidating ancient pressure also surged out from her body. As the two auras surged and merged, the aura that she exuded changed in an instant. Her aura and pressure were not inferior to the aura of a fairy realm powerhouse and the strong smell of blood on the old woman's body. Chapter 1352. Whoosh! Whoosh! A powerful airflow whistled through the wind. The sharp sound was like a sharp blade, bringing with it a penetrating chill. In the next moment, a green light appeared in Fengjiu's hand. The azure-tipped sword, which was suffused with a cold light, slashed down from the sky with a biting cold sword aura. The aggressive slash had the power to destroy the heavens and earth. This was because she knew that when dealing with someone stronger than her, a battle of attrition was not advisable. Only by ending the battle quickly would she have a chance to win. Seeing the biting cold sword aura slashing down, the murderous aura was unable to be dodged. Thus, the old woman condensed her spiritual energy and poured it into the skull cane in her hand. Then, she faced the incoming sword aura. In an instant, the air flow from the old woman's skull cane swept up the blood on the ground and turned into a blood pillar that rushed up. Bang! Boom! A green light collided with the blood pillar. The blood pillar seemed to have dissolved the biting cold sword chi of the azure-edged sword and prevented the sword chi from attacking. However, after a rumbling sound, when the blood chi was smashed back to the ground, the green sword pierced through the blood chi like a hot knife through butter and attacked the old woman again with a speed that was too late to cover one's ears. Whoosh! Seeing the sudden attack of the sword aura, the old woman's expression changed. She hurriedly retreated, wanting to avoid it. Who knew that the green sword aura was so swift and fierce that it was already in front of her in the blink of an eye? She was shocked and quickly used the skull cane in her hand to block, but bang! The human-headed walking stick collided with the terrifying sword chi, and with a bang, it shattered into pieces and scattered all over the ground. Hiss! The green light flashed in front of the old woman's eyes, causing her to be unable to open them. She only felt a sharp pain in her arm and blood seeping out of her face. Ah! A shrill and hoarse scream rang out in the night. The voice was filled with unwillingness, resentment, and disbelief. The voice reached into the night sky and spread far, far away in the night. Ah! Granny Ghost's scream, so scary that when the vengeful spirits hiding in the dolls and scarecrows heard the mournful scream, they couldn't help but tremble and cry out in fear. Granny Ghost is going to die. Granny Ghost's resentment is very great. It's that big sister, I want to go take a look. One of the dolls jumped and excitedly jumped in the direction of the battle. The doll that was missing its left leg and right arm jumped on the blood net's grid and moved forward in the night sky. At the place where the battle took place, the old woman was holding her severed arm. She raised her head and looked at Feng Jiu's sword that was glowing with green light. She chuckled softly. Azure-tipped sword. Hee, good, really good item. No wonder it was able to break through the blood pillar and cut through her blood chi. It was actually the ancient divine sword Qingfeng. The ancient sword, azure-tipped sword, had disappeared for many years. Even the people of the 8 great empires didn't know where it ended up. But now, it had appeared in the hands of a little girl. She covered her shoulder that was oozing blood. She was missing an arm. She closed her eyes and a strange and frightening smile appeared on her aged face. Her sharp and hoarse voice was eerily heard. Chapter 1353. Where's my hand? Where's my hand? The hoarse and strange voice rang out. Feng Jiu furrowed her brows. Sword chi gathered in her hand, and just as she was about to attack, she saw a scene that shocked her. She saw the old woman searching for her severed arm. When she saw her severed arm, she stretched out her hand and sucked the severed arm toward her. Just like that, she forcibly pushed it back to where her severed arm was connected. What was even stranger was that after the blood qi in her hand had melted into magma, Feng Jiu saw her severed arm rapidly regenerating at a speed visible to the naked eye. She even twisted her arm and shook her hand. Feng Jiu's worldview was completely refreshed. A severed arm could be reattached like that? Even a ghost doctor like her could not create such a strange method of reattachment. Just where did this old woman come from? How could her severed arm be reconstructed so quickly after the magma? Magma? Reconstruct? That's right. She knew it. This old woman could perform spirit refinement. Her furnace was inside her body. She could swallow a vengeful spirit and refine it. She could also use her own body to reconstruct her own body. When she thought of this, Feng Jiu's expression froze. She had originally wanted to attack, but at that moment, she stopped. If that was the case, even if she chopped off all 4 of her limbs, she could still use the strange furnace in her body to reconstruct them. Since that was the case, the only place she could attack was here. A clear voice rang out. Feng Jiu leapt into the air, sword in hand. However, at that moment, the old woman, who had long been prepared and knew that she was wielding the Qin Feng sword, flashed like a ghost just as Feng Jiu was about to attack. Here. The old woman's strange and hoarse voice suddenly rang out from behind Feng Jiu was shocked. When she turned around to look, she saw the old woman's bloody palm strike fiercely towards her. Bang! The wind from the palm strike slammed into her body. In that instant, it was as if a giant palm had slammed into her. A powerful and oppressive aura slammed into her back. The bang was very clear in her ears. Pooh! Her body was sent flying by that blow, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. She lost her balance and fell down. That blow caused her to feel intense pain all over her body. It was as if the power of that palm had spread throughout her body, making it impossible for her to stabilize her falling body. Bang! Her body fell to the ground and into the blood web. At that moment, the struggling ghost in the blood web wanted to pounce on her, but it seemed to be afraid of the thing on her body and did not dare to approach. She crawled up from the blood web and used the green sword in her hand to support her body. With a wave of her hand, a bottle of pills appeared in her palm. She quickly poured out a pill and swallowed it. Her eyes darkened as she endured the discomfort in her body and secretly urged the green lotus in her body to heal her internal injuries. Not dead yet? Why aren't you dead? To think that you can still stand up after receiving my palm strike. Not simple at all. The old woman hovered in mid-air, her black robes fluttering in the night sky. She looked at the figure below with some surprise. For a nascent soul realm cultivator, it was almost impossible for him to stand up after receiving a blow from her, a fairy realm cultivator. However, she had done it. She could not help but have a whole new level of respect for her. Chapter 1354. It'll be easier for me to refine your body if you're dead. Since you didn't die from my palm strike, I'll give you another one. A gloomy voice came from the sky. The old woman looked at the figure standing in the blood web below her. Seeing that the ghosts around her were so afraid that they didn't dare to approach her, she knew that she had some kind of treasure on her that prevented the ghosts from getting close to her. Thus, before she could catch her breath, she condensed a ball of blood in the air with both her hands. The ball of blood surged with fresh blood and let out a sharp, angry howl. The entire night sky was covered in dark clouds, and her aura seemed to be controlled by her. It froze in mid-air and was then injected into the ball of blood. Upon seeing this, Feng Jiu's heart sank. She had a bad feeling about this. Her opponent was too strong. With her nascent soul strength, it was already not bad that she could exchange blows with her. Now that she was seriously injured, how could she withstand another fatal blow? She saw that the ball of blood surged with an intense blood-red light that lit up half the night sky. The aura of death emanated from the ball of blood and enveloped the entire town. She couldn't help but gasp. Was this the strength of a fairy realm powerhouse? She was so strong that she couldn't believe it. Right at this moment, the ball of blood shot out from the old woman's hand, and it assaulted her with an aura of obliteration. She immediately turned around and fled, and she used all her strength with the intention of avoiding that attack. Because she knew that she would probably lose her life if she was struck by that attack. However, she still underestimated the speed of a fairy realm powerhouse. Even though she tried to dodge the attack as fast as she could, she was still not faster than the fairy realm powerhouse's fatal attack. Whoosh! Whoosh! A strong airflow came from behind her, stirring up the blood aura on the ground. She didn't need to turn around to feel the powerful blood aura that was roaring like a blood beast. The aura of death was gradually approaching her, and it was as if a mountain was pressing down on her from above. Bang! Ah! A powerful collision sound was heard, followed by Fengjiu's scream. Then, several rays of light suddenly shot out from her body. Bang! She flew dozens of meters away and fell to the ground like a broken rag doll. She couldn't move at all. She lay on her back on the ground, blood flowing from the corner of her mouth. All the bones in her body seemed to have been broken, and she couldn't muster any strength. Crack! Crack! Several cracking sounds came from her body. Hearing those sounds, she moved her fingers and tried to stand up again because the old woman's fatal attack seemed to have been blocked by some treasure on her body. Otherwise, she wouldn't just be lying there with broken bones and unable to move, she would have died in one blow. However, just as she moved her finger, the black figure came to her side and stared at her as if he was staring at something strange. He's not dead yet. The old woman's gaze swept around strangely and landed on the broken things beside her. Her eyes suddenly lit up. So it was these things that saved your life. He, little girl, your life is really tough. You didn't die 3 or 4 times. Unfortunately, when I, Ghost Granny, want people dead, no one has ever been able to leave alive from my hands. Seeing the murderous intent in the old woman's eyes and hearing her sinister voice, the immobile Fengjiu experienced for the first time the helplessness and unwillingness before death. Chapter 1355. She could not accept this. The life-saving treasure that they had given her could help her block a fatal attack, but facing this old woman who was determined to kill her, no amount of treasure would be enough. In this strange town where there was no one around, who could save her? Who could come and save her? Strength, she still needed strength. If she had been a little stronger, if she had been a fairy realm expert, then she would not have lost so miserably at the hands of this old woman. If I break your neck, I'll damage your body. It's too ugly, too ugly. The old woman gestured with her hands, as if she was thinking about how best to kill her. However, when she saw that Fengjiu, who was lying on the ground, was not frightened at all, she could not help but laugh sinisterly. Little girl, you're about to die, aren't you afraid? Afraid? If I'm afraid, won't you kill me? Fengjiu's weak voice rang out, as if it was very difficult for her to speak. Hearing her reply, the old woman seemed to be very happy, as if she was enjoying the fear and terror of her prey before she died. She chuckled, and at the same time, her hoarse and aged voice rang out, she shook her head. No, I want to kill you, I want to kill you. Look at you, such a perfect piece of equipment. As long as I refine it, it'll definitely be even more perfect, and it'll even belong to me, ha 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 ha. No, I don't want to die, I don't want to die yet. Fengjiu's voice was filled with panic and fear. She looked at the old woman, who was laughing hysterically. Suddenly, her expression changed, and she slapped the ground with one hand, instantly leaping up. The moment she leaped up, the Qing Feng sword in her other hand fiercely stabbed towards the old woman's dantian. Whoosh! The Qing Feng sword pierced the old woman's body with a whoosh, and the Qing Feng sword went straight through, causing the old woman's hunched back to bend even more. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked in shock and disbelief at Feng Jiu, who was standing in front of her and holding the Qing Feng sword that had pierced through her body. Her old and hoarse voice sharply questioned, "How can you still stand up? How can you still have the strength to stand up?" Hearing the sharp voice, Feng Jiu's heart sank. She stared at the place where the Qing Feng sword had pierced. That was where the dantian was located. She had used the last bit of spiritual energy in her body to launch a sneak attack. She had used up the last bit of spiritual energy in her body to kill her while she was unprepared. The Qing Feng sword pierced through the old woman, but the old woman's spiritual energy and blood energy, not a single bit. Why? Could it be that her dantian that you're wondering? Wondering why I'm not dying? I'm the one who's wondering why a little girl like you hasn't died yet. Why do you still have the strength? She clenched her fists and raised her head to shout. Blood qi surged out of her body. The powerful blood qi sent Feng Jiu flying. The Qing Feng sword in her body was also pulled out as Feng Jiu was sent flying. Chapter 1356. The old woman walked forward step by step. With every step she took, the surrounding blood qi surged, and a crazy murderous intent filled her body. Because she had been stabbed, blood was still dripping from her wound, and the intense pain from her wound made her entire face contort into a hideous expression. She was not immortal, but she had a rare treasure in her body. However, this little girl had actually wanted to destroy her dantian and take her life. Ha 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 ha. How could she know that her rare treasure was protecting her dantian and the nascent soul within it? She was a mighty fairy, so how could a little girl like her kill her? However, her actions had angered her, and the pain from her wound made her heart surge with a crazy murderous intent. She walked forward and looked at Feng Jiu, who was on the verge of death. Unable to suppress her anger, she raised her hand and gathered blood qi, condensing it into a fierce palm wind. Ah! Granny Ghost killed someone again. Granny Ghost killed that big sister. How terrifying, how terrifying. A vengeful spirit hiding in the distance cried out, then quickly turned around and fled. The old woman glanced at the vengeful spirit, then snorted and looked away. Her gaze fell on the unconscious person on the ground. Since she wanted to destroy her dantian and kill her, she would send her on her way. Once her dantian was shattered and her nascent soul died, she would see how she could survive. Go to hell, said a hoarse and sharp voice. She slammed her palm down, but at that moment, a beam of cyan light shot out from Feng Jiu's body. The cyan light was dazzling, pure, and powerful. In an instant, it sent the old woman who had slammed her palm flying. The old woman was not prepared for this and was sent flying. When she fell to the ground, a trace of blood spilled from her mouth. She looked in shock at the motionless figure lying on the ground, and her heart was filled with shock. What's going on? As the hoarse and sharp voice spoke, another green light shot out from the unconscious little girl's dantian. This time, a fist-sized green lotus flower accompanied the green light. The green lotus flower flew out and attacked the old woman with a whoosh. When the old woman saw this, she cried out in shock, purifying. Purifying green lotus? No, it's the chaotic green lotus. Whoosh! Don't come over. Don't come over. Ah! Amidst her shock, she gathered blood qi with both hands in an attempt to block it. However, the blood qi and the surrounding ghosts instantly dissipated into the air when they came into contact with the green lotus. She watched as the green lotus flew over and crashed into her body at a speed too fast for her ears. She could only scream as her aura was devoured and purified. Her body disappeared inch by inch, as if it had turned into ashes and dissipated in the air with the wind. All that was left was her panicked screams that echoed in the dark night with unwillingness. Why? Clang! A small grey cauldron fell out of the burnt old woman's body and was brought to Fengjiu's side by the green lotus. Then, a green lotus petal fell from the green lotus. When the petal fell to the ground, it turned into countless green light spots, purifying the bloody ground bit by bit. Chapter 1357. Early in the morning, when the first ray of sunlight shone on the earth, the warm sunlight caused Fengjiu's fingers to twitch slightly. Her divine sense gradually awakened, and when she recalled the scene before she fainted, she abruptly opened her eyes and leaped up. Eh? She exclaimed in surprise. After she leaped up, she noticed the injuries on her body. Even her broken bones had been repaired. There was not a single wound on her entire body. That's strange. Why are my injuries all healed? She was a little astonished. She looked around her, but the old woman's figure was already nowhere to be seen. Beside her, a small dusty cauldron was quietly lying there. She picked it up and was slightly startled. This is the ancient divine cauldron, the Shennon cauldron. Even though the cauldron was covered in dust, she could still make out the small words on the cauldron. She stood up, patted her clothes, and glanced at the surroundings. Not only was the old woman gone, even the blood energy in the surroundings had vanished without a trace. It was even to the extent that she couldn't detect any blood energy in this area even after searching over and over again. Although she was a little confused, she did not think too much about it. Because she was alive, that was already the best. She put away the emerald-edged sword, thinking of leaving this place. However, her footsteps paused. She looked at the small cauldron in her hand, then looked in the direction of the ancestral hall. Thus, she walked over there. Her divine sense followed her as she walked, all the way to the ancestral hall. When she entered, she sized it up, then walked to the back. When she reached the back, she could not help but be slightly startled. She saw that there were more than 10 corpses piled up in the open backyard. The dead people were all dressed in black, dressed as guards. From the degree of rigidity of their corpses, they should have died the day before she arrived here. However, other than these corpses dressed as guards, she did not see the corpses of the people these guards were protecting. Her gaze swept around, and landed on a large vat in the corner. It was a large water vat with a lid on top. What made her notice was that she seemed to feel a trace of sealing power. Thus, she stepped forward and released a wisp of spiritual energy from her hand. While unlocking the seal, she also used the force to push open the lid. There was no movement inside, so she walked forward to take a look. She saw a young man in brocade clothes, about 17 or 18 years old. His face was pale, and he was unconscious. His breathing was weak, as if he would die at any moment. She didn't expect that there would be a living person hidden inside. She was slightly surprised and flicked a stream of air between her fingers. With a clang and a cracking sound, the large vat cracked and shattered into pieces on the ground. The person inside also tumbled out. She dragged the young man to the side and checked his pulse. Then, she took out a pill and stuffed it into his mouth. She muttered, "You're lucky to have met me. Otherwise, you would have really died here." After feeding the youth the pill, she gave him some water before sitting down to wait for him to wake up. She couldn't help but have a whole new level of respect for this young man. Chapter 1358. She took out a fruit from her space and ate it as she stared at the boy. From time to time, she would raise her head to look at the sky. It wasn't until around 7 in the morning that the boy on the ground slowly woke up. "Ah! Don't kill me, don't kill me." As soon as the boy woke up, he cried out in alarm. He rolled and crawled to the side, his pale face unable to hide the horror and fear. Who killed you? Fengjiu yawned and asked, since you're awake, I'm leaving. She didn't want to stay in this damned place any longer. At this time, the boy saw that the person sitting in front of him was a little beggar in tattered clothes. Looking at the little beggar with messy hair and a face covered in dust, he couldn't help but sigh softly. He looked around and saw that his guards were all dead. His eyes couldn't help but redden. Where's that old witch? Is she still here? Thinking of the previous scene, his heart trembled, and even his teeth trembled in disbelief. I didn't see her. I just passed by here and saw that the guards were all dead. I opened the water tank and saw that you were alive, so I saved you. Fengjiu patted her clothes and stretched, I'm leaving. There's nothing to eat in this place, and there's not even a shadow of a person. As she spoke, she walked out. Don't you wait for me. The boy was shocked and quickly followed. Fengjiu didn't stop. It wasn't until she was out of the town that she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. She glanced back and sighed in her heart, I almost lost my life here. Little beggar, thank you for saving me. The boy jogged to Fengjiu's side and said. Fengjiu walked forward and said, I'm not interested in verbal thanks. If you want to thank me, do something practical. Then take me home. When we get home, I'll have someone to thank you. I can also treat you to a good meal. He thought that this little beggar looked thin and small, so he usually didn't eat enough. Fengjiu glanced at him and asked, where's your home? If it was on the way, then it was on the way. If it wasn't, then she couldn't be bothered. It's the Danyang city near the Danyang sect. The boy said. Danyang. Okay then. I'll take you with me. But, remember to thank me with a lot of money. It was on the way anyway. Hearing this, the boy was happy and hurriedly said, don't worry, as long as you take me home, I'll have my family to give you 10,000 gold coins. Oh right, I'm Zhu Yu, little beggar, what's your name? Just call him little beggar, Fengjiu said casually. Little beggar, what's your cultivation? Why can't I see through it? He was a golden core cultivator, but he couldn't see through this little beggar's cultivation. Moreover, this little beggar didn't look like an ordinary beggar. Instead, he looked more like a rogue cultivator. This was one of the reasons why he wanted this little beggar to take him home. After all, this way, he would have someone to protect him. Fengjiu didn't even respond to him. Instead, she turned around and saw an ox cart coming from behind. Her eyes couldn't help but brighten. This time, she didn't have to walk and could take a rest. She quickly walked to the middle of the road and stretched out her hand to stop the cart. Old uncle, take us for a ride. Chapter 1359. Thank you, old uncle. She smiled and thanked him. Then, she jumped onto the carriage and sat on the tall pile of straw on the carriage. Give me a hand, give me a hand. Zhu Yu stepped forward. Ever since he was trapped in the water tank, he was on the verge of death. But strangely, after he woke up, he felt that there was an energy supporting his body. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to walk so far. It was just that he didn't know what that energy was. Seeing that he couldn't climb up from the side of the carriage, Fengjiu reached out and pulled him up. Who? Zhu Yu, who had fallen onto the pile of straw, directly lay down. I'm so tired. Sit tight. The old man who was driving the ox cart shouted. Only then did he continue to drive the ox cart forward. Little beggar, are you also going to Danyang City? Zhu Yu lay on his back and looked at the blue sky and white clouds in the sky. Yes. Fengjiu sat cross-legged with one hand supporting her chin and narrowed her eyes. Why are you going to Danyang City? Zhu Yu continued to ask. Fengjiu seemed to have fallen asleep and didn't pay attention to him. In the evening, when they reached the city gate, the old man stopped the carriage and said to the two, "We're in the city, you can come down." Fengjiu jumped down. After resting, Zhu Yu's strength gradually recovered. He slid down from the carriage and patted the straw on his body before walking into the city. "I want to eat a good meal, I'm starving." Fengjiu walked to the front of the ox cart and smiled at the old man. "Thank you, uncle. This is the fee for our ride on the ox cart. It's just a small token of appreciation." As she spoke, she handed a small purse to the old man and then turned to leave. There's no need. As the old man spoke, he saw that the little beggar had already walked far away. He couldn't help but hold the money bag in a daze. When he opened it and took a look, he was even more shocked. He looked left and right and saw that no one was looking, then he quickly put it into his clothes. In the city, although it was evening, there were many people and hawkers walking on the streets. The bustling scene made people feel at ease, especially for the two who had just walked on the brink of death. Seeing the bustling scene in the city, they felt a lot more at ease. "Little beggar, there's a restaurant in front. Let's go there to eat." Zhu Yu turned around and said to Fengjiu, who was walking slowly behind him. "You have money?" Fengjiu sized him up and asked. "Yes, don't worry. Although it's not much, it's enough for us to eat and drink until we reach Danyang City." He patted his chest as he spoke. Then, he frowned bitterly, "My body is weak. I need to nourish myself. Let's go. Then, we'll find an inn to rest tonight. Tomorrow, we'll buy a carriage and take it back." He had thought it through. Taking a carriage back wouldn't exhaust his physical strength. Moreover, he could use the time to nurse his body back. This was because he saw that the little beggar clearly knew how to ride a sword, but he would rather walk. He knew that the little beggar wouldn't take him back. Hearing him say this, Fengjiu didn't say anything else. He nodded and walked with him to the restaurant in front. However, Zhu Yu, who walked quickly in front, went in, but she was blocked outside. "Where did this beggar come from? Go away, go away." The waiter covered his nose and said with a look of disgust. He waved his hand and shooed Fengjiu away. "You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.